Akira came directly, breaking tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between? Would she have been receptive? He came on winter's eve. He pounded on the door. It was raining near the veranda. Chi thought he was the wind. The maid knew better. Chi heard the footsteps and the door. Then the maid, then they answered the door, whatever. Chi was reluctant to go to her guests. She was feeling cozy. She and Naomi were reading at a table. By the way, I broke one of my rules. You've got to always read this part. And so it's an easy rule to break, and I did it myself here. But that little sort of italicized portion will often give you insights that you really need. But a quilt was over her, so she had some heat. Who is it at this hour? Shinoda Akira, Kobe Dental College. Naomi recognized the name. I think you should go, said Naomi. Akira was waiting in the entry. As he bowed, she glanced beyond him. In the rain, she saw his reflection. Madam, said Akira, forgive my disruption, but I come with urgency. His voice was soft. He stole a deferential peek at her face. His eyes shone with sincerity. Chi felt herself starting to like him. Come inside, get out of the night. I don't want to trouble you. Normally, I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. I'm going to America as a dentist. Congratulations. That is an opportunity, but how am I involved? Even noting Naomi's breathless reaction to the name card, she had no idea. Akira's message, delivered like a speech, filled her with amusement. That's how she viewed him as a child. It was how she viewed Naomi, even though Naomi was 18 and training in the arts to make a marriage. She had no effort to find a husband. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. Suddenly, Chi felt the dampness of the night. Does Naomi know your ambitions? We have an understanding. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I asked directly because a go-between takes time. If you give me your consent, I become her Yoshi, which on the bottom it says a Yoshi is like a sponsor. We'll live in Fuji to secure a home for my new bride. Eager to make his point, he looked her fully in the face. My humble apologies. My address is on the card. Until then, good night. He bowed and left. Mother, Chi heard Naomi's low voice and turned from the door. He has asked you. The sight of Naomi's eyes gave Chi strength. Where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine, he thinks he can marry the Fuji heir and take her to America all with the snap of his fingers. Chi waited for Naomi's ripe laughter. Naomi was silent. She stood a half minute looking straight into Chi's eyes. Finally, she spoke. I met him at my literary meeting. Naomi turned to go back into the house, then stopped. Mother, yes, I mean to have him. This is a passage about Japanese culture, about the idea that everything has to be done a certain way. If you're going to ask for a girl's hand in marriage, you can't just knock on the door in the middle of the night and say, hey, can I marry your daughter? That there's a way. And they use the phrase, there's the use of a go-between. So, I know this passage from the past, so I have some insights into it. But as long as you come out of that passage knowing that it's about a guy who broke tradition because he had a special situation and it wasn't well received by the mother, then you have everything you need. And then you can start approaching independent questions one by one. And wherever we are in the passage, we're going to get to know it better and better and better every time. Which choice describes what happens in the passage?
In this instance, there's a couple of answers that are clearly wrong. There's a couple of words that just really don't fit what happened. So I think that could be a good spot to start. If we can rule out one or two answers that are for sure wrong, then we only have to deal with one or two. So for example, here, I would say that C, the reminiscing about choices made over the years, reminiscing, pretty specific. It's a present chat between two different characters for the most part. And over the years, we never really jump back in time. Again, the timeline is always in the present tense. So I would say C is one of those answer choices that I think most students can see is wrong. And then I would say A, if you're reading closely, and if you were going through closely, it says that one character intrudes and argues. And I think that those are pretty strong words also. You want to be careful with the connotation of words here. And again, if you're just interpreting and you weren't reading carefully, or you didn't go back and scan the passage each time, you may think this could be true. However, if you go back and see that the character was not intruding, he was, I believe, in around lines, maybe around lines 30 or maybe 20, something like that, he was let into the house, which is the opposite of intruding if you're let into a house. So I think those are two answers that are pretty obviously wrong if you read carefully at the relevant portions.
Alrighty, and I am fighting with my computer screen to get everything displayed correctly. But yeah, let's go ahead and, we want to follow our own rule here. So let's go ahead and get our eyes on the place where the mom invited Akira in, and that would be right here in line 37. In line 37, she says, come inside. So based on line 37, we're getting rid of answer choice A there. So now we're down to B and D. Was it a character receiving a surprising request from another character, or was it someone criticizing another character? I would say, definitely a huge emphasis in the way we teach this on answering in your own words first. The writers of the SAT are just masters at writing these tempting answer choices that can kind of lure us in the wrong direction. And the way around that is for you, the reader, to be in control, and the answer choices come to you. So you got to know what the right answer is. So what happens in this passage is that a guy proposes to the girl that he loves through the mother. He breaks tradition, which somewhere in the passage they mentioned that the proper tradition in Japan at that time was to use a go-between. But because he had a job offer, he had to kind of do it in a rushed manner, and it ends up offending the mom at the very end of everything. So he's proposing, which, okay, we want to, like I said, not break our own rule, and we want to go ahead and get our eyes on where we're seeing it. So right here, he says, I don't want to trouble you in line 39. I would approach you more properly, but I have a job position. And then later in the passage here on the next page, he says, depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. So don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. And I asked directly because of using a go-between takes time. So right there, we're seeing that this is a proposal and that he didn't use the go-between that was characteristic at that time, in that culture at that time. So then that's going to be B. He's receiving a surprising request from another character. Anything to add, Patrick?
No, that's perfect. And also just the fact that even when he says he has a job offer, but the whole time he's trying to hint at what he's going to ask, but she just has no idea. So it's a surprise to her, which is the other part of this answer that also needs to be supported by a text, which is just the fact that she has no idea why he could be there and what he's going to ask of her.
Yeah, and we see more of the surprise at the very end because she tells her daughter, where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine that. He thinks he can just snap his fingers and take her to America. And notice that I'm not reading word for word. It's very important to be constantly doing that, because we need to really be understanding this rather than just, it's so easy to just follow the words one by one and just have no idea what you're reading, which is, the kind of one of the kisses of death for us. So right there, she's expressing surprise at what she just heard and disapproval as well. So let's go ahead and go straight to number 2 now, the developmental pattern of the passage. This is another one that would be kind of hard to sort of do at that, introductory moment when you're first seeing a passage. So let's kind of take another look here. So this is sort of me doing my speed reading, if you will, sort of a phrase we coined on the fly the other day. But he came breaking tradition. He came on a winter's eve. She, the mom, was reluctant to go to her guest and answer the door. She's saying to herself, who could it be knocking at my door? He introduces himself and she recognized the name. I think you should go, she said. So there's kind of that the disapproval, like, why are you knocking on my door so late at night? And he says, madam, forgive my disruption, but it's a matter of urgency. So it's kind of telling the story as, just this interaction in a doorway here. Anything to add yet, Patrick?
Well, I think it's good up to this point. Nothing yet.
Okay, so what we just saw is a sort of there. It's sort of just telling the story of two people at the entrance of a house. And like we already mentioned before, what he ends up asking is for a proposal for his girlfriend's hand in marriage. So now we can go through the answer choices. Is this an analysis of a practice? We're not analyzing anything. Is it depicting a meaningful encounter? I would say yes. Is it giving a response to a series of questions? One thing I say to a lot of my students is just imagine, what would that sound like? You know, what would an essay sound like if it were a definitive response to a series of questions? You know, just kind of make up a little sample essay like that in your head, just enough for you to say, well, that's not what's going on here. And a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. So right there we have the words cheerful and amusing, which is not what this is. This is in fact quite painful to know that this, you know, I'm sure he's a handsome young dentist, and he's getting churned down for his girlfriend's hand in marriage. So nothing cheerful about that. So we're landing on B. Anything to add there?
No, I think it's very well said.
Perfect. So we'll kind of move forward in the interest of covering more material here. So now we're getting to question number 3, and something that we haven't mentioned yet. When you have a question on what we refer to as passage-based vocab. Now keep in mind, the emphasis in the design of the modern SAT is not to quiz you on vocab. In fact, they were kind of, College Board was kind of saying that those days are over, because the idea of quizzing vocab is sort of culturally, economically biased, right? So we're not supposed to necessarily know every word, and we are supposed to be really comfortable with words we don't know. But what we've had a lot of success with when it comes to passage-based vocab is having students ask themselves, what's the momentary main idea? Because if they're asking you to define a word in context, what they're basically quizzing you on is whether you understand that context. And after you ask yourself, what's the momentary main idea, and answer that in your own words, you can usually invent your own word to substitute for the words in question. And when you go through this process, you'll kind of notice that after that, you'll kind of be all set up to answer the question on your own. Anything to add yet, Patrick?
No, I think that's a good concept. Yeah, that's what I like to tell students too. You don't have to memorize a whole bunch of words. They will use vocab that you may not know the meaning of. However, using the context clues, or as you said, what the momentary main idea is, you'll usually be able to invent your own word for that one place, and then you can obviously cross-check it with what the 4 answer choices are and see whichever fits the best, or if it's the same word that you picked.
Yeah, and in verbal in general, we talk about inventing your own, like answering questions on your own or making up your own word in different situations. And what happens is a lot of times we feel like we're reading, we feel like we're understanding, but we're really kind of just going through the motions. So if I say, well, make up your own word to personify this situation, now you're really forced to understand what you're doing, because you've got to kind of participate in the process a little bit more. So it never hurts to do that. It would be up for debate a little more in the ACT, where time is more of a question. But here on the SAT, 65 minutes to do these questions. So you have a really solid amount of time to get this done. So in line 1 was the idea that he came over directly, he broke all tradition. And then it asks the question, it kind of foreshadows the fact that he's going to be unsuccessful here, and then asks the question, should he have done things differently? So the word directly right here, they kind of all explain right afterwards. They say it's directly and it's breaking all tradition. So the momentary main idea is the idea that he's breaking all tradition. And going over to line 65, so much writing on my page here. But going over to line 65 here, he's asking directly, and then once again defines it right afterwards, because using a go-between takes time. So the momentary main idea is that he's kind of apologizing for the idea that he broke tradition. So both of the times that we were judging the momentary main idea, it had to do with the idea that he was breaking tradition. And if we were inventing our own word, it's such a straightforward word, right? I ask directly. I might invent my own set of words and say he's asking sort of in person. So when we invent our own words, it doesn't have to be a single word. It has to capture the situation so that we can make our own judgments. So what answer are we picking based on all this?
C.
So without mediation, so the tradition in Japan at that time was to use what they called a go-between here on line 65. And so he's not using a go-between, he's not using mediation. All right, pretty good on that one, right?
Very good.
All righty. Okay, number 4. What reaction does Akira most fear from Chi? Now, this would be a harder question outside of the context of the SAT, because just in general, it sounds like they're asking you to really analyze and think kind of deeply. But on the SAT, where the focus is on evidence, it's all evidence-based, where it's also evidence-based, what we need to say to ourselves is there must be a phrase in the passage where a phrase or a sentence where Chi directly says, this is what I'm fearing, right? And off the top of your head, Patrick, do you remember where that is?
Yes, pretty roughly. Well, it's where you have actually, I believe it's already highlighted. It's around 60, the paragraph there. And that's a very good point. Just to add again, if you don't refer back to the text, you can make, reasonable statements in favor of many of these choices if you don't go back to the text. However, as you mentioned, it's based off of what is actually on the paper. And there will indeed be a phrase in so many words where Akira expresses what he would fear. And that's exactly what the correct answer will be. You just want to make sure that you aren't inferring things based off of your memory or your own judgment of the text. Refer back to the evidence, as you mentioned.
Yeah, very much
important.
so. That is the kiss of death. The kiss of death on SAT reading is to just answer based on what you think without getting your eyes on it. So you got to see that evidence every time, because in this situation, you're thinking about a guy asking for a girl's hand in marriage from the parent. So what does he fear? We would be likely to say he fears that the girl's going to reject him, or that he won't marry her, right? But if we get our eyes on the quote, he's saying, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I asked directly because. So he's afraid of her judging him because he broke tradition. And so now we've answered in our own words. And so what answer does that take us to here?
Well, it will be A.
So she's considering his proposal inappropriate. And so, yeah, that really is one of these situations where it's not exactly how we would have answered it if we were just generally answering. But when we get our eyes on that quote, it matches extremely literally with the quote on lines 63 to 67, roughly. Now, this is a nice habit, in my opinion. As you're sort of writing on your SAT as scratch paper, just jot down the lines that you're thinking of for anything. That way, if, let's say, you sort of lose your train of thought for a brief moment, or anything sort of goes wrong, you already know what lines it is. And by the way, the SAT is going to ask you a lot of times on what lines did you get this information. So if you're jotting down the lines, then you're in a good position to be ready for that kind of question. So we got our information from 63 to 67, and the answer number 4 is going to be A. So let's look at number 5 now. And look, speak of the devil, right?
It's like you knew it was coming.
As if I did. So where are we looking now? We already had it down as like 63 to 67. And so C kind of matches up directly with that. And that's something that we do tell students really often. When you're doing this the right way, you'll end up getting to that evidence question and knowing the answer already most of the time. And on that topic, the $1 million question that always comes up on SAT reading, which is the idea of, should you answer the evidence question first because they're already giving you the 4 quotes. And I answer that question with an emphatic no. Do not do that. Heck no is my answer to that. Because what's happening is when we talk about speed reading and looking through the passage really fast for every quote every time, what we're doing is we're becoming masters of overarching ideas, of context, of how everything fits together, of primary purpose. So if we take each of these lines, what you're doing is you're taking them out of context and they have no meaning. Like line 33, for instance, means nothing if I don't know what was going on lines 25 to 37. So a nice best practice on SAT would be to just always answer the question first and then go to the evidence question. And so now we're going to question 6 here, where it says, in the passage, Akira addresses Chi with. So if we're seeing this question for the first time, which of course I'm not and Patrick is not, we'd be kind of really confident to know that if they're asking how does Akira address Chi, it's definitely in there. And so we have to find it, but it's not anything where we'd have to read between the lines or really overanalyze anything. So looking through the passage, I guess whichever of us sees signs of this, I see obviously the very first line, which says that Akira is, being direct and breaking tradition. Let's see.
In the second half of that first page also, that's where we get him, where he's at the entrance. And I believe that's when she tells him to come in. And there's a few verbs there, a few different phrases where we kind of get a glimpse onto how they come to interact with each other. A few different spots.
So she says, come inside. He says, I don't want to trouble you. So definitely in line 39, we're seeing politeness. And his message was being delivered like a formal speech. So that's on line 48. So we're seeing sort of the politeness and the formality of it all. Anything else on this page before we go to the other page?
Yes, so just to add another spot, not sure, but it's right around line 33, 34. It's again his actions vis-a-vis her. And
so his voice was soft and refined. And then maybe the first thing that's a little different from what we've seen so far is in 33 to 34, he straightened and stole a deferential peek at her face. Now, this shouldn't really make a difference to us kind of in the general sort of Western culture, but this is Japan, where eye contact is a big deal, right? And, certain people you're not even really allowed to look at directly. So he's kind of going above his class level or, the respect level that he is allowed to go by looking directly at her is, I think, what's going on. And we don't have to pick that up. That might be getting a little deep into it, but let's see what's on the next page here. So let's see. So here he's kind of being, apologetic. Please don't judge my candidacy a certain way. But then when you get to line 71, eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. And then he bowed and left. So he's kind of being polite, but we've seen the word direct. We see the eye contact. So he's kind of treating her like an equal within this society that has all of these social rules, right?
He's kind of teetering the whole time, right? Wants to do things the right way, the norm, but obviously we know the overall theme is that he broke the standard form of doing it and he came straight to the house and straight to the mother to ask. So again, just the whole time kind of teetering along of respect, but he's still broaching it in a bit of an uncommon way.
So we have the eye contact on the last line, and in line 71, even the way it's being described, he's looking her full in the face. So the way it's described is kind of almost like aggressive or assertive. So we've got the politeness, which is the respect, but then the direct eye contact, which is that he's not utterly, totally respecting her because he's looking at her very directly and with that wording, full in the face. And I might say out of all of our clues, that line on 71 to 72, full in the face, is kind of the most direct evidence for us to pick this answer here. Do you agree?
Yes. Very good.
Alrighty. So let's go straight over to number 7 now. The main purpose of the first paragraph. This is the kind of question that maybe used to bother me a little more when I was just an SAT math whiz and not a verbal person at all. Before I really got trained in test prep. But what would have bothered me is the idea that this is maybe up for interpretation. Like I might see one thing, but somebody else might see something else. So how do we know which one is the right one? But the more well-versed you get in this, the more you realize that verbs are our best friend on these, because once you're analyzing the verbs, you get to that one and only one right way. So, just a quick recap of things we've said earlier. The verbs is, was, are, am, were, be, have, has, had. These are the verbs that you want to kind of keep most at the forefront. So we'll just go ahead and highlight the verbs we see in here. So he came over directly. ING words and to-do words are not verbs, so breaking is not a verb. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? So that's the first paragraph right there. And if we're focusing on those verbs, now we can focus on the subject, which is who or what is doing the verb. So it's the idea that Akira came over directly. Was that all it was? Had he followed form? Had he asked about a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? So now that we're focusing on the verbs, we can kind of narrow it and say that, well, this little paragraph here is fully focusing us on the idea of analyzing in retrospect the way it ended up working out. Would it have been different if he had done the traditional way? So
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
If I can also just add something that you had stated, I believe it was yesterday, also for these types of questions, what's the main purpose? What's the main function? For the other answers, if you're really torn between, think of and picture what the other answers would have looked like in this paragraph, right? If you're not entirely sure, it's D. So if they were to criticize or question, what would that really look like? As you obviously said yesterday, I think that's very helpful, but this approach, if you can pinpoint the verbs, it makes it very clear what is happening in this passage. What's the main purpose of the passage?
Particularly with describing a culture. Like, what would it look like if we described the culture? It would be, something like Japanese culture in 1920 was like this. And we're not saying anything like that. Are we criticizing a tradition? What would it sound like? It would sound like we're saying something negative about Japanese culture. Questioning actually doesn't sound too bad, right? But we're questioning a suggestion. And what's a suggestion? Would be like, if I have an idea, people are brainstorming on something. Oh, here's my suggestion, right? Which is, it wasn't the suggestion that was being questioned. It was right here on that last line, on line 4. Would she have been more receptive? So would she have reacted differently? So the reaction kind of goes, more directly toward what they were saying. So let's go over to so that's D on number 7. Let's go over to number 8 now. And we talked a little bit last time about passage-based vocab. And when you have a question of passage-based vocab, it's not really vocab, it's context and main idea. So what we want to get is the momentary main idea. So we want to know what was being said in the passage at that moment. And, based on judgment, like sometimes it works better than others, but you can invent your own word to fill that space. These are things that are going to allow you to really be confident about the answer. Just remember who is writing these answer choices, and they're not our friends, put it that way. They're the ones who are trying to trick us into getting the wrong answer. So you got to take the leadership, you got to take the motivation, and go ahead and know what it is you're looking for. So going back to that same little area, had he followed form? So, okay, we've already discussed what was happening there. It was questioning the reaction. If he had done things differently, would she have reacted differently? And if he had done things differently in terms of following what? Well, the whole passage we already know is all about following tradition. So now that we sort of got the momentary main idea, which is something we discussed already, and invent our own word, tradition. That takes us to which answer here?
Just before we get to the answer, that's a very good point. And I would just like to highlight the importance of the context. I know I often tell students, read around the word, sentence or two before, sentence or two after. However, here, it's really understanding it within the context of the whole passage. And I think that makes this choice much easier to see also. So just to highlight that point you made, it's an isolated line, it's one word, but really having knowledge of the entire passage and the words, the same words that are used, I think form or maybe tradition is used more than once. So really just, again, context, just want to highlight that. And then for the answer here, it would be B.
Had he followed the custom, would she have been more receptive? Yep. Okay, great. Now this is, they redesigned the SAT. They gave us some practice tests. This is back in 2015. The first of the official redesigned SATs were administered in 2016, January of 2016. So this is test one, passage one. So actually, College Board's craft in constructing these tests may not have been honed as well. And that's kind of how I feel when I see this passage in general, because there's a lot of kind of reading into the sort of the Japanese culture and how that affects, and the culture of politeness and how that affects the interaction, that maybe didn't make this the best passage, So if you're someone who did this on your own and struggled with that, don't always assume that the test writers themselves are perfect. They're just like us, trying to kind of do the best they can. And this was test one, passage one. So maybe the height of the imperfection in terms of determining what this new redesigned SAT was going to look like. So let's go over to number 9. Why does Akira say his meeting with Chi is a matter of urgency? So this is a great time to talk about the what and the why. So here they're clearly telling us where to look. They're telling us to look on line 32. Let's call that the what. It's what we're looking at, all right? We're looking at the phrase matter of urgency. But it would be just way too easy if that was just the answer. There'd be no work involved. So generally the area right before, which you said a moment ago, Patrick, right before and right after, we're going to refer to as the why. And, the question is going to be about the why. The what is sort of our center of where we're looking, but the why is going to be our answer. So let's go ahead and put that to the test here. So he says, Madam, forgive my disruption, but I come with a matter of urgency. So that's our what. And just as a general standard, we're going to say, okay, let's look around here for some reason of why it's a matter of urgency. And
if we look before, it's just a lot of details, not super relevant to this one statement. So we'll want to look a little bit afterward.
Yeah. And so this may be kind of an exception to what we're saying, because on most of the questions, I can definitely testify to the idea that on most questions, it will sort of blatantly be just right here, and it's just that easy. But on this passage, it is actually a higher level difficult question, because much later in the passage, he says why it was a matter of urgency, which is around here. He says, depending on your response, let's see, where does he announce the job opportunity that he has?
I think it's a little bit before. I think it's towards the end of the second half. Yeah, okay. So it's not right after the what, but not far. I believe it's okay. Right after where you correct.
Yeah, so it was within the circle. Look at that.
Very good.
We're vindicated. Normally, I would approach you more properly, but I received word of a position. I've got an opportunity to go to America as a dentist for a Seattle Japanese community. So that's why it's a matter of urgency. And then, going over to the other line, spelling it out even further. Why is that a matter of urgency? Because he says, depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. So like, in other words, he's got to run quickly and get this job. And that's going to determine sort of what he does as far as his travel plans. So what answer are we picking based on all this, or which answers can we get rid of?
Well, I think A can easily get rid of. B, it's not expressed at all throughout the passage. And D is also not very pertinent or very relevant, which leaves us with C, which is a pretty direct restatement of what we just read. You just have to find the right area, but that's pretty spot on.
He's been offered an attractive job, and for the record, the attractive job was in lines 39 to 42. And one thing we've maintained pretty confidently is that when you're doing this the right way, you'll get to that evidence-based question and you will have already answered it. So that actually did happen accidentally just now. It's not always going to happen, but even in situations where maybe you grabbed a different quote than the one that the test writers had in mind, still kind of, sticking to the evidence, doing it the way we're doing will allow you to approach it from a position of power. So let's go ahead and get started here with the second passage. The biggest thing we can really model for you is the idea of that fast first read, which, as we've talked about before, is kind of the opposite of what most people would do when they're approaching reading with no tutoring, with no advice. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to kind of highlight as I read. It doesn't always line up exactly with what I'm saying out loud, but the idea is that we're trusting in our mind's unconscious ability to kind of make sense of things, even if we're not reading every single word. So we're starting with the intro. This passage comes from something called Money Can't Buy Love, Asymmetric Beliefs About Gift Price and Feelings of Appreciation, from 2008. Every day, shoppers hit the stores in full force, searching for the perfect gift. Last year, Americans spent $30 billion at stores in December alone. Aside from purchasing gifts, many buy presents for other occasions throughout the year: weddings, birthdays, baby showers, etc. This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. Now, by the way, people who are listening to this, one thing is, when you sense yourself getting close to a main idea, you do want to slow down a little. We're not just blazing right through it, and just getting nothing out of it. So this frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. Many relish the opportunity to buy presents because gift giving offers powerful means to build stronger bonds with one's closest peers. But many dread the thought of buying gifts. They worry that their purchases will disappoint rather than delight. Anthropologists describe gift giving as a positive social process serving political, religious, psychological functions. Oh, wow, you look so cute. Beautiful dress. Okay, I love you. Live TV here. Okay. Economists, however, offer a less favorable view. Gift giving represents an objective waste of resources. People buy gifts that they would not choose to buy on their own or spend money to purchase. To wit, givers are likely to spend $100 to purchase a gift that receivers would spend only $80 to buy themselves. This deadweight law suggests that gift givers are not very good at predicting what gifts others will appreciate. That's not surprising to social psychologists. Research has found that people often struggle to take account of others' perspectives. Their insights are subject to egocentrism, social production, and multiple attribution errors. So yes, I slowed down there because it seems like they're zeroing in on the main idea. What's surprising is that gift givers have experience acting as gift givers and gift recipients, but still overspend when they set out to purchase a meaningful gift. In the research, we propose a unique explanation for this overspending problem, that gift givers equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate the gift. The more expensive the gift, the stronger the feeling of appreciation. Although the link between gift price and appreciation may seem intuitive to gift givers, such an assumption is unfounded. We propose that gift recipients will be less inclined to base their appreciation on the magnitude of a gift than givers assume. So that's what they're proposing, and I suppose they're going to try to verify it. Why do gift givers assume that gift price is closely linked to feelings of appreciation? Givers believe that bigger gifts convey stronger signals. According to Camera and others, gift giving represents a symbolic ritual where givers signal their positive attitudes toward the recipients, their willingness to invest in the relationship. In this sense, givers may be motivated to spend more in order to send a stronger signal. As for gift recipients, they may not construe smaller and larger gifts as representing smaller and larger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. The notion of gift givers and gift recipients being unable to account for others' perspective seems puzzling because people slip in and out of these roles every day, multiple times in one day. Yet, Despite the extensive experience that people have in both roles, they struggle to transfer information gained from one role and apply it to another. In theoretical terms, people fail to utilize information about their own preferences and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations. In practical terms, people spend hundreds of dollars each year on gifts, but somehow never learn to calibrate their gift expenditures according to personal insight. So that definitely took longer than 60 seconds. 60 seconds is more of a figurative thing sometimes, as far as how long it should take for us to read it at first. We do have to be humans. We do have to kind of adjust how we read according to what we're reading. And this is social science research. There's a reason why a lot of us don't read this every day. It's very dry, very technical, and it's sort of an interesting combination because it's very technical while talking about everyday events. So yeah, you do need to kind of find that nice speed where, yes, you're skipping a lot of words, but you got to be understanding what you're reading, or else why are we even here?
And just also to mention too, when you're reading out loud like that, it obviously takes a bit longer. So if anyone's at home with a stopwatch the time, when you're reading in your head, you go much quicker. So
Yep. But it's a tough passage. I consider this tough. I personally would have an easier time with one of these SAT passages that was written in the 1700s, even though, yes, those words are very antique and outdated and flowery prose, as I like to say. Still, there's something about it that lets you kind of pick up what they're saying really quick as you're flying through without necessarily stopping on every little idea. So let's go ahead and jump right into question number 1. The authors use the examples in 1 to 9 of the passage to highlight what? So, like we said last time, the area that they're referring to us to, we call the what, and the area right before and after, we're going to say the why. And if this is something about the main idea of the passage as a whole, then, a lot of times we'd recommend to maybe skip this and come back to it later, because every single time you look through the passage, you become more of an expert. So what's in lines 1 through 9? People hit the stores in full force, searching for a perfect gift. Americans spend this many billions of dollars. People regularly buy gifts throughout the year for all sorts of events. This frequent experience can engender feelings of ambivalence in gift givers. So actually that last sentence wasn't going to be part of it. So in your own words, Patrick, what is it that they're saying in lines 1 through 9?
Gift giving is very common, and it's a very big market, obviously, the amount of money that people spend. So just on a very, not a daily basis, but very often, there's many different instances where people are buying gifts, and the amount of money that they're spending shows that it's a widespread thing. That's what I would say.
So how common gift giving is, what big money it is very widespread. It's very fundamental to like our culture. Does it say specifically in America? Yeah, it's America specifically.
The Americans, correct.
Okay, so
and that's in 1 month alone at retail stores, month of December.
Yeah, and okay, exactly. So now it is a lot of regularity. So I like A. Increase in the amount of money, a recent increase. As opposed to that, I think it was kind of saying that it's just overall a lot. It's not recently changing.
We're not comparing it to any other time period either, which is what we would need. If there was a recent increase, we would need a time period, correct, prior that would show that it wasn't as widespread.
Exactly. And that's tying into what we've been saying about, for wrong answer choices, imagine what a passage or a paragraph like that would have sounded like. And so that gives you an idea of why this is not that. Anxiety gift shopping causes. Well, in our own words, we said it was really widespread. I mean, you could read into that and say, well, if it's that widespread, it's going to cause a lot of anxiety. Or you could kind of think of the other part of the passage where they describe something that was closer to anxiety. But specifically, that's why we answer in our own words so that we don't get lured away by other ideas that do sometimes sound enticing, although it's not what it was talking about. And the number of special occasions involving gift giving. That was in there. It was, but it wasn't the main thing, right? Now, if you're someone who was, let's say, stuck on choice D, and you're like, well, they did talk about a number of occasions, and you want to really split some hairs and figure out why is maybe A the right answer and D not. Like, in other words, how can we get 100% certainty? And the answer to that is verbs. So let's just quickly look at some verbs in lines 1 through 9. Shoppers hit the stores in full force, searching for the perfect gift. Americans spent 30 billion. Aside from purchasing gifts, people regularly buy presents for other occasions. This experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings. And you see, I keep going to line
That's
10, even though it's
outside.
not part of it. Yeah. So look, there are only 3 verbs in lines 1 through 9. People hit the stores, they spent a lot of money, they buy lots of presents. So if you can become an expert in verbs, and Jaden, the only person who's commented on our recent operation that's been a week young so far, Jaden, I'm talking to you. Go ahead and become an expert on verbs, and you, in my opinion, will see your SAT reading score definitely start to climb up really fast. And thank you so much for your interest in what it is that we're doing, and definitely tell all your friends. We appreciate that a lot. So yeah, so once we took these 3 verbs, we see that it's about hitting the store, spending money, buying presents, and it's not about the number of holidays. So then we're landing on choice A.
Very good point.
Alrighty. So now we're on line 10. The word ambivalent most nearly means. So we've said earlier that for passage-based vocab, we have 2 things to tell you there. You're looking for the momentary main idea, and you can benefit from inventing your own word to fill that space. So let's see which of these things we're going to do ourselves here. So what was the momentary main idea around line 10? That's that line that I just keep unconsciously wanting to read.
This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. And then the explanation comes after in the next 2 lines, right? Both sides of it, maybe to help figure out what the momentary main idea needs to be here. Mm-hmm. I would say that they're, if again, you keep reading the lines, you see that they're basically torn between 2 different feelings that they have. One is that they look forward to the chance to buy gifts for people. And however, the other one is that they dread the thought of having to buy gifts and worrying about not getting the perfect gift. So it's really being torn between the 2 different feelings that gift giving brings about in people.
And look what happened there. When you were explaining the momentary main idea, you, without even realizing it, you came up with your own word, which is torn between. So when you're ambivalent, you're torn between 2 things. And, you know, a lot of young people these days will not know the definition of a word like ambivalent. And, you know, don't fret if that happens, because right after the word, they're essentially telling you what it is they want you to get out of it, which is the idea of relishing, or being torn between relishing the opportunity to do it, but dreading the thought of actually buying the gifts. So which answer kind of is closest to the idea of being torn between 2 things?
I would say pretty simply B.
Conflicted. If I'm torn, I'm conflicted. So that makes perfect sense. Very good. Conflicted feelings in gift givers. So 12 is B, and we keep the answer key nice and handy just to make sure we're on the right track. So let's look at number 13 now. The authors indicate that people value gift giving because they feel. Okay, so this is kind of being a little more vague about where in the passage we can look. So if they're telling us, the authors indicate that people value gift giving because, then that's going to be a phrase in the passage that pretty much, using other words, is going to say, here's the reason why people value gift giving. And
I think it's towards the bottom of the first half and then the top, I believe, of the second half, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so let's just take our time looking for it. Well, you know what?
Or
it might
also
even
in the
be...
first paragraph. Yeah, correct. Also, I just noticed, yeah, in the first paragraph.
Yeah, so people value gift giving because, and the passage says, people relish the opportunity to buy presents because. So look how parallel, look how perfectly these things line up with each other. It's really amazing. So what's the reason why? There's no imagination needed. It's because gift giving offers a powerful means to build social bonds with one's closest peers. So it's like an opportunity to, you see, I think I know these by heart, an opportunity to enhance friendship, Okay, so that would be D, right?
Correct. Strengthen relationship.
And, just get yourself in the habit of notating what lines you got a lot of these from, because lo and behold, you'll get that question. And when you're doing it right, you've already answered that question without even realizing it a lot of the time. So moving on, go ahead and read the question for me for 15, Patrick.
The social psychologist mentioned in paragraph 2, line 1734, would likely describe the deadweight loss phenomenon as which of the following? So here we're getting pointed to a part of the passage.
So a robot would always do better on the SAT than a human, in my opinion, because a robot is going to kind of, as opposed to really thinking about what this means, a robot is going to just say, the deadweight loss phenomenon is, and look for a phrase that does that. So let's go ahead and look through the passage and see. They describe the deadweight loss phenomenon as saying that gift givers are not very good at predicting what gifts others will appreciate. So that's what the phenomenon is. And then, just like clockwork, what it says right after, that in itself is not surprising to social psychologists. So if you find the quote,
social psychologists, exactly.
You can find a phrase that very closely kind of answers what they said. So deadweight loss phenomenon is, and then you look in the passage, it is not surprising. So not surprising is which answer choice here?
Predictable.
Not surprising in our own words. Always get that feeling in your own words. The one thing we can't necessarily convey very well in a session like this, where we have two tutors working on it at the same time, is the idea that what most students would struggle with, you and I are not going to really have a lot of that here, which is the idea that most students are just going to those answer choices so early that they don't have that time to process. So when we found the quote, we said not surprising. We sort of wrote it on our own. What we're doing is we're knowing what the right answer is on our own, as opposed to having, as opposed to overly leaning on the answer choices as hints. There's nothing wrong with looking at them. It's a question of when you look at them. So you've got to be really certain of what it is that the right answer is, and then look over. It'll feel like you're slowing yourself down. It'll feel counterintuitive because your job as a test taker is to get the answer as soon as possible. But more important than that is to get the answer right. You make your money getting right answers. So this is the process that's going to get you there. Other tutors that I've worked with over many years, we all agree by and large that there's this amazing dynamic where it feels like you're going slower, but you're actually going faster and you're more decisive. If I was holding a stopwatch over you, you'd be actually going faster, but it's because you're doing the right thing at the right time. We're not going to walk from here to the grocery store without putting our left foot in front of our right foot. There's just no avoiding that unless you have a car, right? So that's what we're talking about here. These are certain things that have to be done. There's no sidestepping them. You've got to know what the answer is. You got to answer in your own words first. So can you read 16 for me?
Passage indicates that the assumption made by gift givers in lines 41 to 44 may be.
Okay, so this is a little bit challenging here in terms of the fact that it's on 2 columns. So I'm going to take a little screenshot myself and put one right next to the other so that we can kind of read it in its real continuity. Okay, so the passage says, the assumption made by gift givers, and the assumption is, just getting this to come up here. Okay, so they equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate. So they equate gift givers equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate the gift. And then where in the passage does it say what the passage thinks about that assumption?
I believe it's shortly thereafter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, and I mean that's been the trend today, right? We just find the line, and then right after the line, they tell us it's way too easy. Maybe that has to do with the fact that this is test 1, section 1, as we said in our last session, that this was fairly young in College Board's process of unveiling the new SAT. So it's a little, maybe even a little more robotic than usual here. Although a link between gift price and feelings of appreciation might seem intuitive to gift givers, such an assumption may be unfounded. So this assumption that they just mentioned, they're now saying that it's unfounded. And which answer choice might that be?
It's wrong. It's incorrect. C.
Incorrect. Yeah, now unfounded sounds like substantiated, but it's actually the opposite. Insincere would be dishonest, so having other motives. And unreasonable is really close. So if you pick unreasonable here, I sympathize. But what's really happening is, if you think about like what unreasonable would mean in a real context, if someone's being unreasonable, you're being unreasonable. That would be like being like unruly, like maybe someone who's lost their temper or is just angry or something like that would be unreasonable. So if you think of it that way, it doesn't match as closely.
And then also from the words that they even said, they said that it may seem intuitive. So, right, they can understand why the gift givers might think in this fashion, right? They would assume that the more money they spend, the more value that gift has. So they're at least saying that they realize it might seem like your first instinct to think the more you spend, the more value the person is going to take from that gift. However, it's simply unfounded. It's just not correct.
So it might seem reasonable, but it's not. That actually sounds like we're arguing in favor of B.
Exactly. Well, I'm saying that they're saying, well, they can understand why people might think that way. However, so they're not saying it's not unreasonable. They're just saying it's flat out wrong. That's the point that I was trying to make. Yeah, we can get into the nuts and bolts here, but they're just saying it's simply wrong. However, you want to try to justify it, sincerity, the rationale behind it, regardless, it's simply wrong.
Yeah, but what they're not saying is, they're not saying don't be unreasonable, like in everyday life to say you're being unreasonable means you're being kind of mean or something like that.
Correct.
So the evidence for the previous question is right here, that assumption is unfounded, which is what we were just talking about. And actually, it's not one of our answer choices. So it's kind of a good thing that that's happening, because we've been hitting these home runs every single time we find evidence. It seems like it's just exactly right there, but it's not going to happen every single time. And if it doesn't happen, it still puts you in a position of power to make a better decision about which of these is actually right. Now, the one thing we want to say on the evidence-based question is you want to restate what you just said. So in this situation, we feel like we just discussed it or we just picked our answer, so it's fresh on our minds, but it's really not, in terms of just having that real sort of access to what it was we just said, so that we can not get confused at all. So you want to restate or at least have it right there. The assumption made by gift givers is incorrect. So, and that assumption was the idea that the bigger the gift, the more they'll appreciate. So bigger equals appreciation. And that assumption is just wrong. So we restated what it was that we picked on the last answer, so that when we get the evidence, we can just be crystal clear in pursuing which of these repeats that. So is that what they say in 53 to 55?
Perhaps givers believe that bigger, more expensive gifts convey stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration.
So that's saying that that's what they believe. That's saying that that's their assumption, but it's not saying that it's wrong, right? Okay, and 55 to 60.
According to Kammerer and others, gift giving represents symbolic ritual whereby gift givers attempt to signal their positive attitudes toward the intended recipient and their willingness to invest resources in a future relationship.
Yeah, so right there, it's kind of explaining like, so A was, this is the assumption, and B is kind of telling us why this is their assumption, which is the idea that it's this symbolic ritual where people are signaling how much they care about one another. So it's kind of the why behind it, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a sentence that says this assumption is wrong. So what about 63 to 65?
63. As for gift recipients, they may not construe smaller and larger gifts as representing smaller and larger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration.
So right there, it's saying gift recipients don't think that bigger means something they'll appreciate more. So far, that's the closest one to saying that that assumption that bigger gifts are going to be more appreciated is, that assumption is wrong. And 75 to 78.
In theoretical terms, people fail to utilize information about their own preferences and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations.
So now what's this one doing? This one is explaining why that assumption is wrong, because people are failing to utilize the right information for the right thing. So that's why their assumption is wrong. But C is the answer choice that says specifically that it's wrong. Do you agree?
Yes, spot on.
Alrighty, perfect. So, okay, go ahead and read 18 for me.
As it is used in line 54, convey most nearly means.
Okay, so we already said for our passage-based vocab, we want our momentary main idea, and we want to invent your own word. So we're becoming such experts that we are using acronyms now, like bosses over here. So what was the momentary main idea at that moment then?
I would say to get across, perhaps, right? Get across the fact that they want to send a stronger signal, perhaps.
Yeah, well, it's
in purchasing the larger gifts, correct?
Yeah, it's explaining the rationale behind this wrong assumption, right? Like, why do people have this wrong assumption? Because they believe that bigger, more expensive gifts convey stronger thoughtfulness and appreciation. So that's our momentary main idea. It's explaining sort of the logic behind the wrong assumption. And so what word might you invent to replace convey?
As I said, maybe to get across, right, this feeling or this notion to the person you're buying a gift for. It's not one word, but
to communicate it
without
right?
saying the answer, correct? Yeah.
And well, you know what? That's what happens though when you're coming up with your own word. And for any listeners here who are not believers in the idea of answering in your own words and slowing down in this way, it might be one of the more important things that we're saying overall. This magical feeling of slowing down in the right way at the right moment, where if I compared you to your other self that would have been doing it the regular way, you're actually going faster. Because if I just take a question, process it, and come up with the right thing in my mind that sort of works for this question, and then look at the answer choices, and then I do that for another question, and I process that one, and I pick an answer, it feels like I'm going slow, but I mean, in the time I've been talking about this, I just answered 2 questions, right? So that's what we're going for. We're going for processing in the right way. It's, speed is not always better. And take that from the people who are telling you blow through the passage in the beginning and don't read every single word. So we do recommend being really fast sometimes. It's a question of judgment. This is why we love being SAT and ACT tutors, because the things that we're teaching students are things that are not just going to help them on the SAT and ACT. They really do leave students more college ready and career ready and ready to move on to that next part of their lives, developing that judgment in some of these tough situations. So going over to number 19, the authors refer to work by Camera and others. So that's our what in line 56 is our what. And we're going to go before or after it to look for the why that answers why the what's. So line 56. So according to Camera and others, so what is it that Camera and others say? Gift giving represents a symbolic ritual whereby gift givers attempt to signal their positive attitudes toward their intended recipient and their willingness to invest resources in a future relationship. So notice that I'm not skipping as many words when we're answering questions. So it's not all about going fast. It's about knowing when to go fast and when to go slow. And when you're answering questions, that's when you need your microscope out, because you want to get this question right 100% of the time. I believe it's easier to get perfect on reading than any of the other sections on the SAT, because the right answer is just the right answer. So it's kind of explaining, it's getting a little deeper into the cultural, sort of like the cultural basis for gift giving, which is that it's this symbolic ritual. So it's kind of getting deeper into explaining why people feel this need to convey, to signal their positive attitudes toward their recipients and their willingness to invest in their relationship. So it's saying this is why people feel this way, even though we're here to say that it's wrong. We understand why people feel this way because deeply embedded in the culture is this symbolic ritual. So now why, there's a lot of reasons why they're saying that. How would you answer that in your words? Why are they giving us this right now?
They're trying to provide some kind of insight as to why this is what the gift givers feel. They're explaining basically the rationale behind it, perhaps.
Explaining like the rationale, the motive, right? And so now that's why this right here seems valuable, because they're kind of talking about a motive, but they're not questioning that motive at that moment. They may come around to question it later. So C may look really enticing because they're talking about a motive, but they're explaining something which is offering an explanation, right? So offering an explanation for why people do this thing that the passage is going to go ahead and say in a little while is incorrect. So for number 19, we have A. And now we're moving straight forward. Okay. So Patrick, 20.
The graph following the passage offers evidence that gift givers base their predictions of how much a gift will be appreciated on which of the following?
I remember not liking this graph very much from doing it with students. So now when we have questions on the graphs, what we want before we get into what they're really asking us much for is we want the general trend. The SAT, for kind of framing everything in this really apparently sophisticated and complex manner, it really goes crazy with that on the graph, but more often than not, the answer is going to be something way surprisingly more simple in comparison to how complicated a lot of these graphs look. So just erasing some of the distracting information on the screen right here. But so what would we say is the general trend of this graph?
Well, I would just say that for the recipients, there's not as big of a difference in the mean appreciation with a less expensive gift or one that costs more. Those bars seem to be pretty even.
So there's more difference between the two bars here, and there's less difference between the two bars for the recipient. And also it's the idea that the giver thinks a more expensive gift is going to be appreciated, but the recipient often found the less expensive gift to be more appreciated, right? So that there's just this clear difference between which one the different characters in the story would choose. So the graph offers evidence that gift givers base their predictions on how much a gift will be appreciated on. So we're only talking about the gift givers, and they base their appreciation on what?
It's higher when the gift costs more, so the price.
Yeah, they're all about the more expensive one. And so that's the price. And which answer is that?
The monetary value.
Monetary value. So we're following our nice, simple, tortoise versus hare approach here of just digesting it ourselves, processing it, answering in our own words, and then landing on the answer choice that that matches that. So let's go to number 21. The authors would attribute the differences in gift giver and recipient mean appreciation as represented in the graph to. So now let's kind of sort of digest this in our own words a little. So the graph says that the givers are more interested in money, but the recipients are not. So it says that there's sort of that incorrect assumption. So it's talking once again about the incorrect assumption that we talked at length about earlier. And the question is saying, the authors of the passage would say, or why would they say that is? So what's their reason for that? And looking through the passage a little, we were kind of just getting there when we were reading before, which is maybe like around here. People fail to utilize information about their own preferences and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations, whatever that means. People struggle to transfer information gained from one role and apply it in another complementary role. So two versions of the same explanation there, which are the idea that, how would you explain that in your words, Patrick?
Both of them are?
Well, it's the same idea kind of being sort of explained in different words a couple times.
I would just say that when you're in one role, you are blind to your feelings in the other role, even though, as it says, we're used to being in both of them in everyday life. However, when we're in one, we just really seem to be stuck in our way, and we don't consider how we would feel if we were in the other person's shoes.
And I'm just kind of summarizing what you're saying. People are having trouble going from like one role to the other.
Or taking into account the feelings of the other role, or how they would feel, correct, in that person's shoes.
Sort of like the perceptions, even though they go from one role to another, when they're in one role, they're kind of stuck in that role. It's kind of in our words what's being said here. And which answer might match that?
The inability to shift your perspective, I would say.
So now let's go ahead and kind of see. This is maybe one of the tougher questions here. So we want to, for anyone who's viewing this, really leave them with that feeling of certainty of how they definitely would answer this beyond the shadow of a doubt. They're struggling to transfer information from one role and apply it in another role. So transfer information from one role to another, shift perspectives. And those are definitely synonymous with one another. So this is one of the things we're trying to show here. Although there are many, many very intimidating things about the SAT reading section, there are many moments where, once you start to catch what they're doing, it almost feels like, man, could they have maybe put a little more work into it, or a little more, effort into this? Who knows?
I think most students will just be happy to get the correct answer. They'll take the points and run.
Exactly. So, alrighty. So let's go over to this one here. All right, Patrick, do you feel like you want to try that speedy skipping words approach on real-time internet here?
Of all the passages, you picked this one.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? I use this one as an example because I'll say, I tell parents, if I give talks, to parents about the SAT, or, at the introduction of, summer programs and things like that, you got to go over to your kids and give them a pat on the back for what they have to do these days, because they're being trained. They're doing most of their reading on Facebook and Instagram these days. And then they have to go over and read things that were written by Abraham Lincoln, by Henry David Thoreau, by the guys who discovered DNA, which is what this is. Watson and Crick. If you've taken biology recently, you'll remember that. Watson and Crick are the guys who discovered DNA. And that's what this passage is. It's kind of explaining what they learned about DNA. And I've read this passage a ton of times, and I still have no idea what they're saying about DNA. But you don't need to. You just need to answer your questions and get the heck out of there, right? You want me to do this one?
No, I'll take a stab at it. We'll see if I'm as.
I'll highlight along with you.
You can be my the transcriber.
There we go.
We don't have a timer, but I'll try to strive for the clock. So, chemical formula of DNA is well established. Molecules, very long chain. Backbone consists of a regular alternation groups. Each sugar is attached to nitrogenous base, 4 different types. The bases are adenine, guanine, purines. The other 2, thymine and cytosine, pyrimidines. So far as known, the sequences are irregular, consisting of phosphate, sugar, and base, known as a nucleotide. First feature of our structure, which is of biological interest, it consists 2 chains, both coiled around a common fiber axis. It's been assumed that since there will only be one in the structural unit, the density taken with the extra evidence suggests very strongly that there are 2. Other biologically important features, the manner 2 chains are held together. This is done by the hydrogen bonds. Bases are joined together in pairs. One is hydrogen bonded to a single base from the other. Important point is that only certain pairs of bases will fit into the structure. One member of a pair must be purine, the other a pyrimidine, in order to bridge between 2 chains. If it consisted of 2 purines, there would be no room for it. We believe the bases will be present almost entirely in their most probable forms. If this is true, conditions forming hydrogen bonds are more restrictive. The only pair of base possible are adenine with thymine, guanine with tough word. I gotta keep a lot of big words.
Who cares is what I like to substitute them with.
For example, adenine can occur on either chain, but its partner must be thymine. Phosphate sugar backbone of our model is completely regular. Any sequence of the pairs must fit into the structure. Follows. Along molecule, many different permutations are possible. It seems likely that the precise sequences of bases, which carries identical information, the order of these bases of the chains were given, one could write down the exact order of the bases on the other one. One chain is a complement of the other, and this feature, which suggests how the deoxyribonucleic acid might duplicate itself.
All right, so we're talking a little bit about the nature of what DNA looks like, you know, to the really technical heads out there, but also kind of how it, you know, the stuff that they've learned that allowed them to understand how DNA replicates itself. And then there's this chart, which also means absolutely nothing to me right now. Could you tell my bias away from biology? But that's the idea of it, you know. Now, just compare the way we read this to how we might have read this initially, which is the idea that we'd be so into trying to understand every little thing that we wouldn't be able to come out and say, oh, here's a passage just kind of understanding like what they know about DNA so far and how that sheds light on how it replicates itself. But one thing we do want to emphasize, though, is we do want to always read this, right? And I am the worst at forgetting to do that. And it seems for me like the moment that I forget that is the moment where there's critical information in there. You never know. I would maybe even say 1 out of 10 times there's important information in that introductory part there. But when it's in there, it could put, and you haven't read that, it could put you in this holding pattern where you just can't figure out why the right answer is right and there's just no way around it, you know? So
and
it's
at the very
adaptive.
least, also, it just helps to place into context whatever the type of passage. If there's maybe no clues or something that'll help you, I just think knowing the context is always a bit more helpful.
Yeah, and the context is that it was written in 1953, Genetic Implications of the Structure of DNA. Watson and Crick deduced the structure of DNA using evidence from X-ray diagrams of DNA and data on the composition of DNA. So more reason why I'm glad to be an SAT tutor and not a genetic biologist, even though I have a feeling they make more money. So the authors use the word backbone in 3 and 39 to indicate that. So let's kind of just look at those as the what and the area around them as the why. So right here we have the molecule is a long chain. The backbone consists of alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. And then they talk about the nitrogenous bases and everything that goes around it. And then in line 39, the phosphate sugar backbone of our model is completely regular, but any sequence of pairs of bases can fit into that structure. So the 2 times I read it, I noticed that they're talking about here's the backbone, and then here's all the other stuff that goes on top of it. So back to line 3, the backbone, and then to each of those is attached a nitrogenous base. So if I was answering in my own words, why did they use the word backbone? It's to say that there was this structure to which they were going to add all this other stuff. And if that sounds like a really dumbed down interpretation of it, it is. And I'm proud of it because that's what we need to do on these things that are really portrayed to us as, you know, this is too highbrow for you. There's some other smarter kid out there who's getting it, but not you, right? That's the psychology of how this is all being presented to us. But we're here to tell you that, no, forget about that other kid. You're the one who can get this right. So do any of the answers kind of match how we said it in our own words here?
So basically the backbone is a structure onto which we place this other stuff. Well, we have the word structure in B, same word you used.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we also have structural unit in D. The word structural also comes up in D.
Okay. So then we'll have it down to probably B and D. So A has something kind of ridiculous in it. Only long chains of DNA can be taken from an organism with a spinal column. We definitely were not reading about spinal columns. And a chain in a DNA molecule consists entirely of phosphate groups or sugars. Now, do we know for a fact that that's wrong? Yes, because right here it says that there are nitrogenous bases, which are not phosphates or sugars. So we can say for a fact, based on line 5, that C is wrong. And that's what you want to be doing. You don't want to be waiting 3 weeks to know how you did. You want to know how you did right now by getting that evidence. So the main structure is composed of repeating units, or nitrogenous bases form the main structural unit. Do you see why either of those are wrong right now?
So actually, maybe to why one of them is correct, it talks about the regular alternation, and the regular, that word was used right around both of these lines that were quoted, lines 3 and of 39. And I think that that is pretty synonymous with the repeating units.
So we got regular alternation in line 4, and we've got regular in line 40. So that's the idea of the repeating units. And then just a quick word about why D is wrong here. It's not just nitrogenous bases. It says that they were sugar and phosphate groups, and each of those had a nitrogenous base. So the main structure was the sugar and phosphate group. So D was, specifically wrong. So getting along, nice and solidly through this. I think we're doing a good job so far. And looking at question 23, a student claims that nitrogenous bases pair randomly with one another. Which of the following statements in the passage contradicts that claim? So we need to contradict the claim that the nitrogenous bases pair randomly. So we're going against that claim. So are they going against that claim in line 5?
To each sugar is attached nitrogenous base, which can be of 4 different types.
Yeah, that sounds kind of random right there. So we're trying to go versus anti against the idea that it's random. So it's vague anyway, yeah. So 9 through 10?
So far as is known, the sequence of bases along the chain is irregular.
Irregular is kind of like random. So that would almost be sounding to me like it agrees even more. Okay, 23 to 25.
The bases are joined together in pairs, a single base from one chain being hydrogen bonded to a single base from the other. Again, also pretty vague. Doesn't tell us exactly what it means.
It says they're pairs, but it doesn't say whether they're random or whether there's an order. And then 27 to 29.
One member of a pair must be a purine and the other a pyrimidine in order to bridge between the two chains.
So right there, it's telling us that if one of them is one thing, the other one will be the opposite thing. And so it's not random. It's specifically, if we know about one, then we will specifically know about the other. I'd love an even better. I was thinking more, off the top of my head, this sounded like what they say later in the passage, which is that if you can read the order of one, then you know the exact order of the other because of how they pair up with one another. But the closest thing we have to that right now is choice D, 27 to 29. And 23 is D right here on the answer key. Okay, so going over to 24, in the second paragraph, 12 to 19, what do the authors claim to be a feature of biological interest? So it just sounds like they're asking us to demonstrate some comprehension here. So 12 to 19, which is right here. Why don't you speed read through this for us?
First feature of our structure, which is of biological interest, bingo, is that it consists not of one chain, but of 2.
All right, there we go. So we don't even need to read the whole thing. The fact that it consists of 2 chains. Is that a wrapper? 2 chains? No. I think I'm a little outdated here. 2 chains. Put a Z there for people who are fans. So that's choice D right there. And we're done.
The SAT misspelled it.
There you go. There we go.
We found a mistake.
I think that's valuable to me because when I was a classroom teacher, that was one of the rappers that my students listened a lot to. Oh, the good old days. Okay. The author's main purpose of including the information about X-ray evidence and density. Okay, so that's a nice case of the what and the why, and they're not giving us the number here, so that kind of takes it to level 2 kind of difficulty. We need to find where they talked about the X-ray evidence and density, and then we need to go around and kind of figure out what was the momentary main idea there, what was being said at that time that X-ray evidence and density fit into. So, and one thing that kind of happens sometimes, but not always, and we talked about this, is that the questions kind of line up. Like we were just like around here. We were just around here in our discussion. And now we're looking at X-ray evidence, which happens to be right here. So there's kind of this organic, like, the questions are kind of going in line, like sequentially with the passage. And it seems to be one of those things where if you look for that too much, then you don't find it. But something that you kind of naturally fall into as you're doing this. How much of that have you seen?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common. I mean, even just the past two passages we've done, it seemed like it happened when you drew your circle, and then we went to the next question, and
Is the
that
next circle
evidence
right below?
was a part of, yeah, it was right there. So I would say
Yeah.
it's really common. Maybe if you're not drawing a circle on your paper, but I think you will notice that it's follows pretty soon thereafter, or it's not too far away.
Yeah. So not a golden rule, but definitely something to kind of keep your eye on. Okay, so what was being said there that this evidence was part of? So I'll just kind of speed read through here. The first feature of our structure, which is of biological interest, is that it consists not of one chain, but of two. These are coiled around a common fiber axis. It was assumed that since there was only one chain, there would be only one structural unit. However, the density taken with X-ray evidence suggests that there are two. So now answering in my own words, I'm saying that this statement, this evidence is proof that there was not one structure, but two. Does that take us to any answer choices?
The
So
number of chains.
The two chains.
Correct.
So establish that DNA is the molecule that carries the genetic information. I'm not seeing that anywhere in here. Present an alternate hypothesis about the composition of a nucleotide. Were we seeing anything about nucleotides?
I was going to say, no, I don't think nucleotides were even mentioned in this paragraph.
So this kind of gets into the anatomy of a wrong answer choice, because in our own words, we could have said this is presenting an alternate hypothesis compared to what they said in blue there. And so, you know, the writers of a lot of these tests are kind of hoping that we won't read all the way to the end, because an alternate hypothesis, great, I pick it and then I move on. And that's what happens if you're frantically rushing. Provide support for the author's claim about the number of chains, the fact that there are two chains. So that might be good. And confirm the relationship between the density of DNA and the chemical formula. So nothing about density anywhere in there. So it looks like choice C, and 25 is in fact C. Okay, so number 26, based on the passage, the author's statement, if a pair consisted of two purines, for example, there would not be room for it, implies that a pair. So once again, that's our what we're seeing in lines 29 to 30 is kind of the fiber of what they're pointing us toward. But we want to know what was the main statement being said that was sort of an example of. So what was the main statement being said on like 20 to 30?
The important point is that only certain pairs of bases will fit into that structure.
And the
here
reason,
we're talking about.
The reason why is because the bases are joined together in pairs, a single base from one chain bonded to a single base from the other. So only certain pairs. And then it gets into more detail. One of those must be a purine and one must be a pyrimidine. So now if I'm answering my own words, I would say that there are these pairs and that they just discussed. There's these pairings going on. And then the 29 to 30 is saying why this makes sense. Well, why does this make sense? Because if it was two purines, it wouldn't have the right amount of room, right? So why is it that there are these two pairs that they're discussing here? So are there any answer choices we can get rid of here?
I think a pair of purines would be larger than the space between a sugar and a phosphate group.
As far as that being a right answer?
No, as far as not really pertaining to exactly, I don't think what was being stated.
I like it a lot, actually. I mean, I'm not 100% on the answer yet, but I'm seeing a lot of consistency because it says if a pair consisted of two purines, there would not be room for it. So two purines is a pair of two purines would be too large. There would be no room. Then the space between. Well, okay. You see, and maybe I'm guilty of the same thing, which is that it's larger than I don't know. I'd like to maybe leave that one
I
for
think it's
later,
okay.
actually.
Yeah, no, but I think that the first part is good. I think it's when it gets more into the specifics in the second part of that answer. That's where I was going towards the space between a sugar and a phosphate group. That was the part of the answer, but we can consider what the other ones are.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm looking back myself and saying, well, is it the space between the sugar and phosphate? I'd have to really kind of go back and identify, right?
Yeah, that's what I was keying in on.
Okay. And what about B?
So the pair of purines would be larger than a pair consisting of a purine and a pyrimidine. I think that one, the explanation is better for that one, because it's saying
Yeah.
why does it have to be one of this and one of the other, because they fit, right? It wasn't necessarily talking about the space between the sugar and the phosphate group. It was more talking about the space that is occupied by the two pairs, right? That's
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it says right there in pink on lines 27 and 28, one must be a purine and one a pyrimidine. If they were both purines, there would not be room. So a pair of purines has to be too big because there's not enough room for it
they're
compared to what
implying.
should be
Yeah,
there in lines
yeah,
27, 28, which is a purine and pyrimidine, right?
correct.
Okay, cool. Yep. So B is the right answer on 26. Very nice. And so that's 26 right there. And let's go to 27. Can you read that for me?
The author's use of the words exact, specific, and complement in lines 47 to 49 in the final paragraph functions mainly to
So we got exact,
specific,
specific, and complement.
complement.
We can call those the what, and now we're looking for the why. So what was the big thing they were saying at that moment that this fits into? It's another tough one in terms of one of the hardest parts of my job is when the columns don't line up. Got to like take a little photo and sort of glue it next to it. So that's what I'm doing right here behind the scenes. Okay, the phosphate sugar backbone is completely regular, but any sequence of the pairs of bases can fit into the structure. It follows that in a long molecule, many different permutations are possible, and it therefore seems likely that the precise sequence of bases is the code which carries the genetical information. If the actual order of the bases on one pair of the chains were given, one could write down the exact order of the bases on the other one because of the specific pairings. So there are these specific pairings, and if you know those, then you're able to read one and predict precisely what the other one was going to have. Thus, one chain on line 48 is, as it were, the complement of the other. And it is this feature which suggests how the DNA molecule might duplicate itself. So how would you answer this one in your own words right now, based on what we just said?
A lot of information. I would just say that basically knowing the sequence on one, as you mentioned, would let you determine what the sequence has to be on the other one, which is important in DNA, the DNA duplication, as it says towards the end of that. To keep it in pretty plain terms, there's a lot of information there, but I think that's the overall gist of that whole portion.
And so we're kind of getting at what might scare people about the idea of answering in their own words first, because we don't know if they're going to emphasize the idea that it's very exact and knowing one allows you to know the other, or if they're going to kind of say, well, this is the information that we knew that sheds light on how DNA replicates itself. We don't know which one they're emphasizing. And there's nothing wrong with kind of having both of those in your back pocket when you answer in your own words. And, then you're approaching the answer choices from a position of power. So A, confirm that the nucleotide sequences are known for most molecules of DNA. Do we like that one?
I don't like it, no.
Yeah, we're not saying we know it. We're saying if we know one, we know the other, but we don't specifically know any according to what they just said to us. B, counter the claim that the sequence of bases along a chain can occur in any order.
I think they say they acknowledge at the beginning that it can happen in any order. So it's
They
the
say
opposite of what I was saying.
The exact opposite. Somewhere. Different permutations are possible. So correct. They specifically say it could be any order, any different permutation. So C, support the claim that the phosphate sugar backbone of the author's model is completely regular.
So
It's not,
yeah, might be an answer that students will get, or they may think is right, because around this area that we went through, this is stated. However, the function of this question is asking the specific words that you have highlighted later on. What function do those words have? So just because this is stated at the beginning of the part that you pasted, however, are these words really tying back into that idea? Or is it more about the idea that appears right around where you have those words?
yeah, the whole
Specific
backbone
complement.
thing was kind
Correct.
of like around the beginning of everything. It's not really getting
It was
into
just being
that right
mentioned.
now.
Correct.
And emphasize how one chain of DNA may serve as a template to be copied during DNA replication, which is one of our candidates of what we said it might be when we were answering in our own words. So D is looking really good. Do you agree?
Yes, because again, the exact order, the specific pairings that complement, to duplicate, to replicate, as they put in the question, I think.
Yep. And in line 49, and it is this feature that suggests how DNA might duplicate itself. Okay, perfect. So that's 27. Now we're going over to number 28. Based on the table and the passage, which choice gives the correct percentages of the purines in yeast DNA? Okay, fun stuff. So we've got yeast, which is right here. And the reason why this is difficult right now is that in the passage, they tell us which of these guys are purines and which are pyrimidines. So this is a kind of a higher level question because it's asking us to cross-reference what we're seeing in the table against what we saw in the passage. And let's see if we can find the place where the passage talked about which one is a purine and which one's a pyrimidine.
It looks like right around maybe between 5 and 10. Mine's 5 and 10.
Adenine and guanine are purine, and thymine and cytosine are pyrimidines. So we'll put the purines, adenine and guanine, in blue, and thymine and cytosine, the pyrimidines, in pink here. So the correct percentage of purines in yeast DNA,
31.3 and 18.7.
Yep, we've got those two percentages right there. The blue ones are our purines, these two, and the numbers match up perfectly, which is C. So 28 should be C.
Yes.
And it is. Good. Alrighty. Do the data in the table support 29? Do the data in the table support the author's proposed pairings of bases in DNA? So where are the proposed pairings? Is that the same area?
I think it's a little later. Yeah, right where you have pyrimidine right there, I think.
So adenine with thymine.
Oh, correct, yeah.
Guanine with cytosine. So okay, now we're all about answering in our own words, as we've said a million times. But if you're on a harder question, you want to reserve the right to cheat off of the answer choices a little bit. So while we're kind of, collectively like, what the heck is going on here as we're looking through this, right? That's a good time to kind of say, okay, well, in what way are they asking that? Let's look through the answer choices a little bit. Because for each organism, the percentage of adenine is closest to thymine and guanine is closest to cytosine. Okay, so now they're kind of telling us, are they pairing correctly based on the idea that the numbers match or don't match? So do adenine and thymine match? And it's not restricted to yeast like it was on the last question. So do the adenines and thymines seem to be matching?
They do. Pretty closely.
All right, good. And
Top
then
to bottom.
the guanine and cytosine are really close matches as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we cheated off the answer choice to see the sense in which they were asking the questions, we're going to go ahead and maybe pick an answer choice and say, or just answer in our own words, yes, because they match. So which answer might that be?
I think it's in fact A. That was the first one.
Adenine and thymine.
A and T and G and C.
Guanine and cytosine. And I wouldn't be surprised maybe behind the scenes if, because this is a harder question, the writers of the test said, you know what, let's kind of balance it out by making A the right answer choice. Who knows? That's just a conspiracy theory of mine there. So let's look at number 30. According to the table, which of the following pairs of base percentages in sea urchin DNA provides evidence in support of the answer to the previous question? Okay, so like we said, when it's evidence for the previous question, we want to kind of restate what we said. So we said a second ago that the pairings were correct because the adenine matched the thymine and the guanine matched the cytosine. So
and now
they're
with
asking
sea urchin
us,
DNA. Yeah, we're looking at the sea urchin.
Sea urchin DNA. So we're looking for the A to equal to T or the G to equal to C, right?
Correct. So either 32.8 and 32.1. However, all the answer choices contain a 17 point something. So 17.7 and 17.3 would have to be those corresponding.
Because it was the guanine and the cytosine that matched, or it could have been these two, but we're just not seeing those two blue numbers as a right answer choice. So 17.7 and 17.3. And so we'll pick A for number 30 and just verify it with the answer choice, with the answer key. Alrighty, and 31. Based on the table, is the percent of adenine in each organism's DNA the same or does it vary? And which statement made by the authors is most consistent with that data? Okay. So we're looking at adenine only across organisms. So is it the same or does it vary?
Well, it seems to vary to me.
Yep, I see it varying. All right, and so we've got adenine varying across different organisms. And so let's see which answer choice matches that. Well, we can already get rid of A and B because those are saying that it's the same. So now between C and D. So 36 to 38, adenine can occur on either chain, but when it does, its partner on the other chain must always be thymine. All right, who knows if it supports it or not, but I'm imagining that D is going to sound great.
Yeah, I don't really like that one. Yeah, it's more talking about what the other base percentage needs to be.
And then 41, it follows that in a long molecule, many different permutations are possible, and therefore seems likely that the precise sequence of bases is the code which carries the genetical information.
I like that one more.
Well, we're looking for the idea that it varies across organisms.
So many permutations are possible, right, in the percent of the adenine.
Okay, good. So 31 is D. And we're going now to our next passage. You know, Patrick, I just love the way you read that last one so much. I'm such a fan of that.
Of course.
That I'm thinking you can read this one as well.
This is one of these 1700s
ones.
I'll take this one. You have to take the next one.
Oh, man. Now that I'm looking at it, this might have been a better one for me because it's really old school. But go ahead and give it a try.
This is mine. All right. So just to obviously highlight the little excerpt before we get into it.
So we got Virginia Woolf, 3 Guineas, 1938. She considers the situation of women in English society. Okay.
All right. So close at hand is a bridge over the River Thames, vantage ground for us to make a survey. River flows beneath, laden with timber, bursting with corn. There on one side of the domes inspires the city, and the other Westminster, the House of Parliament, poised to stand on by the hour dreaming. Not now, we are pressed for time. Consider facts. We must fix our eyes upon the procession, the sons of educated men. There they go, brothers who have been educated at public schools and universities, mounting those steps, passing in and out of those doors, sending those pulpits. It is a solemn sight always, a procession like a caravanserai crossing a desert. For the past 20 years or so, it is no longer cite merely, at which we can look with merely an aesthetic appreciation. For their trapezing long tail end of the procession, we go ourselves, and that makes difference. We have looked so long at the pageant in the books, from a curtain window, watch educated men leaving the house, returning only about 6:30, need look passively no longer. We too can leave the house, passing in those doors, make money. We who now agitate these humble pens may in another century or two speak from a pulpit. Nobody will contradict us. We shall be the mouthpieces of the divine spirit, solemn thought. Who can say whether as time goes on, we may not dress in military uniform. You laugh. Indeed, the shadow of the private houses still makes those dresses look a little queer. We have worn private clothes go along. We have not come here to laugh or to talk of fashions, men's and women's. We're on the bridge to ask ourselves questions, very important questions. We have very little time in which to answer them. Questions we have to ask and answer about the procession during this moment of transition are so important that they may well change the lives of all men and women forever. We have to ask ourselves here now, do we wish to join that procession or don't we? On what terms shall we join? Above all, where is it leading us? The moment is short, it may last 5 years, 10 years, or perhaps only a matter of a few months longer, but you still object. You have no time to think. You have your battles to fight, your rent to pay. Madam, as you know from our own experience, and there are facts to prove, daughters of educated men have always done their thinking from hand to mouth. They have thought while they stirred the pot, while they rocked the cradle. It was thus they won us the right to our brand new sixpence. It falls to us now to go on thinking, how are we to spend that sixpence? Think we must. Let us think in offices. Let us never cease from thinking. What is this civilization in which we find ourselves? What are these ceremonies and why should we take part in them? What are these professions and why should we make money out of them? Where, in short, is it leading us, the procession of the sons of educated men?
Oof. So, man, yeah, it's an interesting passage. It's not fun that we're being asked to make sense of something so complex at a moment when our college hopes and dreams rest on this, so to speak, even though they don't, so don't get crazy. But you know, a good time to maybe talk about how the ACT reading level is a solid level below this. So, you know, inevitably, some people the SAT will click for them. And for some people, the high level of reading comprehension and the trickiness and the math questions will just kind of be too much. And then they shift over to ACT. But that's a wonderful thing, even if that happens, because the SAT, I consider it to be like heavy weightlifting. And then when you turn over to the ACT, now you're strong and the heavy weightlifting helped. And so it benefits you either way. But we do recommend for every student starting with SAT first, whether you end up sticking with it or whether you're now in great shape to turn over to something that's just a tiny bit easier. But turning our attention to the specifics of this passage, it was, I really do think that reading the introductory portion here was so important for us because it's not incredibly evident to a first person reading this for the first time that they're considering the situation of women in English society. And I noticed one thing that I noticed as you were reading it was that on some of the poetic moments where the narrator was saying, let us look to this, let us look to that, let us look to the other thing, you kind of caught wind of that and just skipped ahead, which is why we're reading fast in the beginning, because it's like, okay, let us look at the other thing, let us look at the other thing. It doesn't matter at that point. They're looking, and in terms of getting a quick comprehension of everything that we need to kind of just move forward. So just kind of going over this for main idea purposes, because it's going to come in handy. Close at hand is this bridge, and it says it's a place to stand dreaming, but right now we're pressed for time. We must fix our eyes on the procession of the sons of educated men. There they go, doing all their everyday stuff. And we who have looked so long at this in books from a window, so we, the women, have looked at this for so long as bystanders,
correct?
Yeah, secondary people. We need look passively no longer. We too now can do all these things, and now we can skip past a lot of that. You laugh, maybe people who are looking at the women, or maybe the women who don't think they can do it, right? But we have not come here to laugh. we're here to ask ourselves certain questions, and they're very important questions, and we have little time to answer them. So now we're getting to the sort of the main idea of the whole thing. The questions that we have to ask and answer are so important that they may change the lives of all men and women forever. Do we wish to join that procession or don't we? And on what terms? This is a short moment. It may last 5-10 years, right? So it's kind of saying that right now women are getting rights, and women are about to start sort of really becoming just like everyone else in society. And it's a good time to say how and on what terms. So in what way do women want to become part of this whole thing that historically only men have become part of? And then just skipping ahead to the end, where is it leading us, the procession of the sons of educated men? So as women start being more and more capable of, in society, of doing the things that men do, where is it leading them? So not just to say that now that women have rights, they want to be exactly like men. Maybe women might look at that and say, you know what, let's let the men do it. Maybe it's not even in our interest to be just like them. You know, let's at least stop and do some planning before we decide how we're going to be incorporated into the rest of society. So definitely just a brutal passage, right? So it's one of those. And you know, I sympathize with people seeing stuff like this for the first time, because, you know, I'm reading it with an understanding, having seen this passage before. But would I have gotten all that if I were seeing it for the very, very first time? There's just no way to know. That's why sometimes when we get our hands of new copies of SATs that have come out that are sort of floating around the internet and so on, I kind of enjoy that process of kind of being on the hot seat to see if I would have been able to extract it. And also, maybe even better than that, the idea that when we don't fully understand, we can still operate, because we're going to be, you know, as we said in our intro to the reading, we're going to be reading and rereading and sort of making better and better sense of this every time we get into the passage to answer further questions. So let's go ahead and start, I suppose.
Maybe the next video we get a fresh copy of the latest QAS and we film it and we do it in real time.
Oh man. Yes. How nice that would be, right? Wouldn't that just be so nice to do that? So the main purpose of the passage, if we're seeing this for the first time, we don't have to answer this question now. So a lot of what we say depends on your willingness to let go of questions. We may not know the main purpose yet. So, you know, for the sake of the video, we'll do it in order, but if we were seeing it for the first time, we may just immediately just skip this question and move forward. But the purpose is to say that women are gaining access into the workforce, and they need to stop and say to themselves and sort of deliberate amongst themselves, how do they want to enter into this workforce, and make it a decision as opposed to something that just happens accidentally, however it happens.
And also just stressing what's the word I'm thinking of? It's very momentous time, right? The author mentions many times, right? We're pressed for time. It's a short period of time. So that was also one of the themes that kept on coming up. They don't have 100 years to sit and discuss what it might look like. It's pretty time pressed.
Yeah, and the best place where they mention that is right here on around line 57. It says, this moment is short. It may last 5 years, 10 years, perhaps only a matter of months. And you have no time to think, but that's not an excuse. Right now, we have to make these decisions. And so, and throughout the passage, just all sorts of mentions of that type of urgency. Now we are pressed for time. Correct. On line 8. We're here to consider the facts. We must fix our eyes on the procession. So we're finally getting access to the workforce, just like men. So in this critical moment, let's go ahead and look at the men and look at what they're doing and see, is that what we want for ourselves, or do we want to carve out a different kind of niche? So in line with that is, what's your answer choice?
I would say it has to be B.
Stress the urgency of an issue. Yep. So this being kind of a tougher question for someone who's not familiar with this passage, we may want to spend an extra time sort of talking about why the wrong answers are wrong, emphasize the value of a tradition. It's definitely not a tradition because at that time, women are sort of doing something that had never been done before. The severity of social divisions, it's kind of the opposite of what's going on here, because it's saying, hey, these divisions are being broken down now, how great this is, but let's figure out what we're going to do with this. And the feasibility of an undertaking. You see, that's a really tempting one because women need to question the feasibility of this undertaking, or not necessarily the feasibility, because that's kind of feasible. Feasible is the question of, can it be done? And the passage is saying, no, it will be done, but we just need to take an active part in determining how we're going to do it.
Determining if and how we would do it, correct? Not necessarily can we do it, as you mentioned. So that's what makes that wrong. Very good.
So our biggest problem with D is just the word feasibility.
Correct.
Cool. So let's go to 33. Central claim of the passage. Once again, a question that we may not want to answer now if we're just seeing it for the first time. Yeah, and that's what they do. They're gonna the SAT is gonna ask a lot of these deeper questions right at the beginning, and someone who doesn't know any better
your cage.
is going to be rattled. Yeah, it's going to be stressed out by that, right? So let's not be stressed. So to reiterate, we just went over all this before, so we know the central claim of the passage. So which answer choices are ridiculous according to that claim? That women are gaining access and they need to ask themselves, how do they want to enter into this labor market?
I think this is a tough question because there aren't many answer choices that are very clear to be wrong, in my opinion. I think maybe the one prior was a bit easier, looking at which answer choices could not be correct. There's one answer choice here that I do like a lot, and I think is very good at kind of explaining what we just said. But I think that there are other choices that, in my opinion, are not very obviously wrong, which may make this question a bit difficult. What do you think?
So women gaining access and how must they do it? That closely aligns with choice A, right? Women are facing a decision about how to engage with existing institutions. So they're gaining access to those institutions, and how are they going to do it? So we like A a lot, but let's go ahead and have that conversation about why the wrong answers are wrong. And B, let's see.
I think part of it seems good. It's just the other part where they have to, giving up. They don't really ever talk about needing to give something up. It's really just engaging with these new roles that they could have.
And the idea of only if is kind of like almost like a threat. You can only do this if you give up something else. So, anything we pick, we want to kind of know where we got that from and be able to point at the lines. So if I challenge anyone to say, okay, find me a place where it says you can only have that influence if you give up these roles, kind of in that threatening kind of way, you'd be hard pressed to find it. And so the male monopoly on power in English society has had grave and continuing effects. I'd call this kind of like the opposite of the answer, right? Because this passage is all about how males are no longer having a monopoly, right?
The continuing part is the one word here that just needs to make it wrong. It's no longer grave to the point where women can't engage or can't have any of these jobs. It's at the point now where they are able to join the workforce. So that's the one word makes it wrong.
It's no longer continuing.
Correct.
And the entry of educated women into positions of power traditionally held by men will transform those positions. I think it says, we might find a quote that sounds a lot like that. Somewhere in the passage, it says it may change men and women, but it doesn't say it's changing the positions anywhere in the passage.
Correct. So, it's just changing their lives, not the position. So not it won't be substantiated.
Yeah, and I'm kind of looking through where it says, like line 52.
Yeah.
The questions are so important that they may well change the lives of all men and women forever. So that sounds a lot like D, but it is a significant difference to say it's changing the lives of men and women versus it's changing the positions themselves. So changing the job of being the teacher or a police officer or some other job, they just don't line up in that way. So, I'm really looking forward to word getting out about this work that we're doing here, because I'm imagining there are millions of high school students around the United States and around the world who are kind of just sinking their teeth into SAT and getting familiar with how to do all this, and could really benefit from a lot of the more in-depth conversations about how to approach it, and justifications for why we're doing what we're doing and getting those right answers on the SAT. It's always it's always a little painful to see answer explanations in the back of like an SAT prep type of book, where they'll just give you like one quick little line, and if you don't understand what they're saying, tough.
Yeah.
So, anyone who needs help on any of these kinds of things, just let us know in comments, and we'll try our best to accommodate any of those requests. So 34, Woolf uses the word we throughout the passage for what purpose? So that's a very open-ended and tough question. So let's kind of look at some of these occurrences of the word we throughout. Okay. Line 24. There, at the end of the procession, we go ourselves, we who look so long. We too can leave the house. We too can do all these things, is basically saying. We have worn private clothes so long. We have not come here to laugh. We are here to ask ourselves certain questions, and they're very important questions. We have to ask ourselves,
shall we join that procession? 55.
Yep. So what's the reason for the we? It's a lot of solidarity amongst women. It's kind of saying, we women have some important work to do. And I think it's also emphasizing like the urgency of it, right? Like we are this group and we've got to roll right now, right? Like it's like a let's roll type of verbiage. So which answer choices can we maybe match up with that, or maybe get rid of? Reflect the growing friendliness among a group of people. There's growing friendliness. Doesn't necessarily go with solidarity or urgency, even though friendliness and solidarity are, not mutually exclusive, but they're not the same thing. Advance the need for candor. So what's candor is honesty. And it wasn't close to what we said in our own words. Establish a sense of solidarity. So, once you answer in your own words, you'll often accidentally, predict the answer in the SAT, which is wonderful. And D, reinforce the need for respect. So once again, solidarity and respect, they kind of go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So we're landing on choice C for 34, right?
Yes.
Alrighty, can you read 35 for me?
According to the passage, Woolf chooses the setting of the bridge because it...
Okay, so there's a bridge. It's an admirable vantage ground to make a survey. So if we're being super duper literal here, why did they pick it? Because it's an admirable vantage ground to make a survey. And is there anything else? It's not a place to stand by the hour dreaming. We're pressed for time to fix our eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. So literally here, it's an admirable vantage ground to observe the procession of the sons of educated men. So which answer does that match? Or does it match one?
Looks like B.
Provides a good view of the procession of the sons of educated men. C, I can definitely get rid of historic episodes, and it's symbolic of the legacy of past and present sons. So there's no symbolism, there's no parallelism, but we do need to have a longer conversation splitting hairs between A and B. Is there anything that you don't like about A?
Well, I'm just trying to see, is there any fanciful reflection, talked about in and around wherever they describe the bridge?
I might say this is actually the opposite, just because we're training ourselves to be robots here, because like we say, a robot would do better on SAT reading than a human who can kind of make sense and read into things and kind of mess yourself up that way. Here it says we are, let's see, I saw it a second ago.
there's one sentence that does a very good job of explaining or of basically showing what you just said, where it says that it's a place to stand on by the hour, dreaming. However, is that why she chose the setting of the bridge? The next part tells us, in fact, why she chose the setting. So maybe not a reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and she kind of considers, is it because we can stand here dreaming? No, not now. So the passage kind of blatantly rejects that as the reason why. So the fanciful reflection possibly, and then the passage says, not now. That's not what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So B is the only one left standing after we considered A and looked at lines 7 and 8 as a reason why, 6, 7, and 8 as a reason why A doesn't go. And let's look at number 36. Woolf indicates that the procession she describes in the passage. Now, we're all about answering in our own words, but this seems to me to be a really vague question. The procession is, something along the lines of whatever we're talking about is just so vague that you're going to want to cheat on that one. So notice how few times we say the word cheat, and that's almost like a dirty word in school, anything school related, but we're not saying that. We're saying cheat more in the sense of, if you're a baseball fan, the first baseman cheats off the first base by kind of taking their foot off just a little early. So here we're saying, even though we don't like to look at the answer choices too early, if the question is vague, then we do want to kind of look at the answer choices a little on the earlier side so we know what it is we're looking for. So what do we see in the answers? The procession has come to have more practical influences, has become a celebrated feature, includes all the richest and most powerful, has become less exclusionary. So which of those is something that we've seen in this passage? And what do you think about that?
I think the main idea of women joining the workforce really is a restatement of only one of them. I would say D.
Yeah, and
maybe
so
we're a little biased. Obviously, we've read the passage many times, but
this is what we wanted to happen, right? We wanted to say, we're not going to understand it that well in the beginning, but every single time you're looking for these answers, you become more of an expert. And that's what's happening now. We really do kind of know without looking, although we want to be careful and just fight our laziness and our temptation to just pick an answer and move forward. That's kind of what we call the kiss of death on the SAT. So everything that I'm highlighting in orange here has been the procession of educated men that they talked about. But then when we get into purple here, but now for the past 20 years or so, it's no longer a site merely, for there we go ourselves. So the passage is very literally saying, this is now becoming available to us. So I'm expecting on the evidence question that it's going to be like 23 to 25, which is exactly that. So we're killing two birds with one stone. It's becoming less exclusionary. Choice D for 36. And because of C for 37, for there we go ourselves. Now we women are becoming part of the procession. So 36 should be D, and 37 C.
Yes.
And we do have that in the answer key. Alrighty. So it is a lot of work to go through one of these, isn't it? I was gonna actually try to propose, why don't we knock out sections 1 and 2 in one sitting, but definitely gotta get a good night's sleep and recharge before we approach those. But it does seem like it's advantageous to just do the whole thing, right? Because when we were doing little bits and pieces, we would do a 20-minute session, and only with all of the small talk and all the background, we're only getting a little bit done. So in question 38, Woolf characterizes the questions in 53 to 57 as, now this, if you're not being literal here, this is a much harder question because it would require you analyzing this, but we're going to pick the questions and we're going to find the place where Woolf said these questions are blank, right? So the questions on 53 to 57, we have to ask ourselves, do we wish to join that procession? That's one of the questions. On what terms shall we join? That's the other question. And last but not least, where is it leading us, the procession? So those are the questions. And where does Woolf say those questions are very blank?
So again, as you mentioned before, this is the what and the why, right? It comes around. So we look a little before, a little after.
So we've got the why, before and after, and I'm seeing right here in yellow, the questions that we have to ask and to answer are so important that they may well change the lives of all men forever. So before we even going into this question, we knew that they were going to say these questions are blank. And look how amazingly the SAT just tosses that to you to just take it and get into college based on that question. So these questions are important and impactful because they're going to change lives. So where does that take us?
Definitely not A.
Not controversial. They're not threatening.
Weighty could be important. What would you say?
Unanswerable was not said. They didn't say they're impossible questions.
Correct. That one is not said though. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
C seems to corroborate what
Momentous is important. Impactful. Momentous is impactful, and pressing. They're lining up, but not in that exact parallel way. But that is going to end up being the answer. And nothing about mysterious.
Yeah. And then also just to jump back to C, the why also a little bit prior to where you highlighted in you highlighted the yellow, right before, very little time in which to answer them. So that's the pressing part.
That's
so
the pressing.
A little before.
Yep. Very good. Awesome. So the evidence for that is going to be, we're already, you see the amount of power, because we've already debated, should we be looking at the evidence-based questions first? And to be honest, I get in that conversation with students a lot, and I sometimes am short on words as far as like why. Like I know in my heart that it's not what you should do, but I run out of explanations of why. But look how nice this is when you're doing it this way, because we already know we're looking for 48 to whatever that is, 54, right? And so we're going to,
so it's
we're going to go ahead and
until 50. Yeah. Well, basically, if we have the orange starts at around 48 until 53, and the only choice contained in there is B.
Okay, perfect. And so now we're going on to question 40, which says, which choice most closely captures the meaning of the figurative sixpence referred to in 70 and 71? So here they're talking about this sixpence. It says, it falls to us now to go on thinking, how are we to spend that sixpence? So a little background, it was the passage about how women were just coming into access to power and the labor force. And the main idea of the passage was the idea that women shouldn't just dive in blindly, but should spend some time generating some intent. How are we going to, that's the main idea of this question. How are we going to spend that sixpence? So in other words, how are women going to enter the labor force? Is there a certain impact they want to have, as opposed to just randomly doing whatever comes in handy? So in this particular question, they kind of introduce the idea of the sixpence, and they're asking us for the meaning of that. But then it gets a little poetic. So think we must, think in offices, think while we're watching coronations, think in the gallery of the House and Commons, and courts, and baptisms, marriages, and funerals. So a little poetic, and you want to kind of skip through a lot of that. We're not reading word for word, because that's what we're here to teach you not to do, sort of to read big and not get too stuck with your microscope analyzing every little word, unless it comes to that on a particular question. But after all of that sort of poetic stuff, it says, let us never cease from thinking, what is this civilization in which we find ourselves? What are these ceremonies, and why should we take part in them? What are these professions, and why should we make money out of them? Where is it leading us? The procession of the sons of educated men. So in your words, Patrick, what is the sixpence that they're referring to?
So before I get into that, I just want to say you did a very good job of summarizing, right? Before you look at what four answer choices are, as we've gone over before, read the question and you want to think in terms of your own words, what would be correct. So you did a very good job there. The highlighted part around 70 to 71. Then also, just to state once more, when you have a quote here, the one word is quoted, sixpence. That's telling us, right, maybe the what, then we have to look around for the why, or for the context clues, as we did here, comes a bit further after. And now to get back to the first question. So what does the sixpence mean in context here? And again, I may use the same word as what the correct answer is, but it's really this opportunity or the chance or the path that's been forged for them now to consider how to interact with and which ways to do it. And so really the opportunity or the chance that's been afforded to them. And a bit prior to the quote you have, it talks a little bit about that, the women that came before them who earned them the right to the sixpence. So that's a bit of a long summary of what I would say for this one.
These other women have thought while they stirred the pot. They rocked the cradle. So these other women wanted this opportunity, but now we women have it. And what is this opportunity? If we're looking for the place where they explicitly say it, what is this civilization? What are these ceremonies? What are these professions? So if we're going to be sort of robotic about it, it's the civilization, the ceremonies, the profession. So all, in my own words, I might have said it's the access to things that women didn't have before, the access to, aspects of the professional life, of things that men characteristically have had.
And then one point I would also like to just show, I've only noticed it now for the first time, but however, if you contrast the places where women have thought prior to the introduction of the sixpence word around 70-71 with the places where they now must think after they've been afforded this access, if you contrast those places, you can see very clearly that prior to having the access to the sixpence, it was the long-standing, roles that women would have. Whereas now after the sixpence, they're talking about, right, all of these places of business and work where normally men would be. So I think that there's a good contrast there between before they were afforded this opportunity, the access to the sixpence, and now after the call to action, where they now must think, not in the standard, in the kitchen, at home, the standard roles that maybe women had at that time. Now we have to think in these newer places, the omnibuses, the House of Commons, the law courts, right? Maybe where before women weren't necessarily a mainstay or weren't even allowed.
Yeah, because there's that kind of contrast in closer to line 60, or actually closer to line 63, the daughters of educated men have done their thinking not under green lamps and study tables in line 66, where a professional would have done their thinking, cloisters of secluded colleges, but instead stirring the pot, rocking the cradle. But now they're in buses and commons and the law court. So there's this contrast. So access, we might say, to places, to theoretical places where professional people do professional things. So, okay, so going on to number 41, the range of places and occasions listed in 72 to 76. So exactly what we were talking about serves to emphasize, what would you say in your own words? What is it emphasizing, this range of places?
Again, I don't want to use the exact words. Obviously, it's tough for us to do this. We know what the answer choices are, but I would just say how abundant the locations are for this thinking. I might even say how urgent, again, may tie into the bigger theme of the momentous opportunity that is standing before them. But yeah, I would use those two words, the abundance, maybe the urgency.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is everywhere. I mean, they're even mentioning funerals, right? Like offices, coronations, commons, law courts, baptism, marriage, funerals. Like, I mean, they didn't really leave anything out at all. So I think they're basically saying, let us think everywhere, and so just like you said, the abundance of it. Can I spell everywhere though? That's my problem right now. But yeah, let us think everywhere. And it's showing how abundant this opportunity is, or how important this situation is, that you should be thinking about it everywhere that you go, right? So which answer are we picking here then?
Which would be B, pervasive, the need for critical reflection is.
It's pervasive. You should be thinking of it everywhere and everywhere you go because it's that important. Okay, great. All right, so that's 41. Moving along, now we're on a new passage. And we'll go ahead and practice our speed reading now. For anyone who hasn't listened to a lot of our talks before, this is maybe one of the more important things we teach in the reading side, which is kind of the random. And I seem to remember a gentleman's agreement that I was going to have to do the next one, right?
Your memory is not faulty.
So, okay. So now we always want to read this little thing. Passage 1 is talking about space mining, the next gold rush. Passage 2 is talking about taming the final frontier. So there's a different energy right there because it's a gold rush and then we're taming it. And so, knowing the passage already, I'm really aware of that, but I'd be kind of looking out at the difference between those wordings. So what we're demonstrating for listeners is the idea of trusting in your innate ability to know what words are more important, and also realizing that as I'm not reading every single word, the other part of my mind, that the more unconscious, subconscious part, is actually following everything. And we need to kind of just little by little learn to believe that. I've got a wonderful student I'm working with who's scoring in the 750, 770 on math, and then 610 on verbal. But I know he's going to get there on the verbal side because I know how easy this is to do, and it just takes a little kind of going through it and just getting more comfortable. So it's not that we're developing some ability we didn't have before. It's we're becoming comfortable with doing something that we were not comfortable with before. So jumping right in, follow the money, you'll end up in space. So there's money in space. That's the message from a first of its kind forum on mining beyond Earth. It was in Sydney at a Center for Space Engineering. It brought together mining companies, robotic experts, lunar scientists, government agencies. The forum comes hot on the heels of an unveiling of two firms. Planetary Resources of Washington says it'll launch its first prospecting telescopes in 2 years. I'm reading word for word now because I just unconsciously sense more of a main idea. Deep Space Industries of Virginia hopes to be harvesting metals by 2020 from asteroids by 2020. Another venture, Golden Spike, will be offering trips to the moon, including potential lunar miners. Within a few decades, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals, platinum and gold, rare elements vital for personal electronics. But like the gold rush pioneers who transformed the US, the first won't just enrich themselves, they'll also build an off-planet economy in which materials are processed from the moon and asteroids are delivered for space-based projects. Water mined from other worlds could be the most desired commodity. What's worth more, gold in space, gold or water? Gold is useless. Water will let you live when you're in outer space. Water ice from the moon's poles could be sent to astronauts and the International Space Station for drinking or as radiation shields. Splitting water makes spacecraft fuel, so asteroids can become refueling stations. So a little slower than our 60 seconds, but when you get into science, sometimes you have to be that way. Companies are eyeing the iron, silicon, and aluminum in lunar soil and asteroids, could be used in 3D printers. Others want to turn space dirt into concrete. The motivation for deep space traveling. Okay, now we're going to passage 2. So we're looking for another perspective. The motivation for deep space traveling is shifting from discovering to economics. We've seen proposals. No doubt this will make a few billionaires wealthier. I'm sensing a little sarcasm there, but we all stand to gain. Before the miners start firing up their rockets, we should pause for thoughts. So, by the way, there are lots of pairs of passages. Like one could be pro something, one could be con, one could be giving an idea, a theory, and the other one could be putting the idea into practice, theory versus practice. And so we're already seeing at the beginning here that we've got a new exciting idea for passage 1. And then in lines 53 and 54, it says, okay, the idea is great, but calm down a little. Let's just pause for thought. So continuing forward, there's some concerns, probably no life on asteroids and no habitats to trash, but consequences merit careful consideration. So it's all about being careful. Part of this is about principle. Some will argue that space's magnificent desolation is not ours to despoil, just as they argue that our own planet's poles should remain pristine. Others suggest that glutting ourselves on space's riches is not an acceptable alternative to developing more sustainable ways on earthly life. That was a harder paragraph, so I had to go a little more word for word there. History suggests that those will be hard lines to hold. It'll be difficult to persuade the public that these are worth preserving. They exist in vast abundance, and even fewer people will experience them that have walked through Antarctica's icy landscapes. There's also the emerging off-world economy to consider. The resources that are valuable in orbit and beyond may be different than those we prize on Earth. These questions have barely been broached, and the relevant legal and regulatory framework is fragmentary. Space miners are often reluctant to engage in such questions. One speaker concluded that regulation should be avoided, but miners have much to gain from broad agreement on the for-profit exploitation of space. Without consensus, claims will be disputed, investments risky, and the gains made insecure. It is in all of our long-term interests to seek one out. So you want to be going fast like that. You don't want to waste the energy that you're going to need later in order to go through the questions in detail. Any thoughts, Patrick?
No, I think it's very well said. And yeah, you kind of have a knack sometimes for where you should slow down. If it's a paragraph that's a bit tougher to read, or important phrasing, we should stop for thought, or we should pause to consider. I think that was the phrase came up. I think that we have a pretty good knack for that sometimes, or the inverse of that, a part with many details that can be brisked over pretty quickly.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, like if they're giving 10 examples of the same thing, after I pick up the third one, I can just kind of move on forward. But if they're introducing a new idea that we haven't heard yet, we may want to stop and just make sure we understand that idea. So, okay. So is this the right place? Nope. Good thing I asked myself that. Okay. So are we going to question 42? Yes, we are. The author of passage 1 mentions several companies primarily for what purpose? So let's look to see where the companies were mentioned.
9 to 17.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just clearing all this craziness out of here. Okay, so 9 to 17. And so now the main idea of the paragraph, of the passage, was to talk about the excitement of all these things that we could do, and this sort of new frontier that has yet to be explored or capitalized upon is a better way to put it. So when we're looking in that area, we're kind of getting the introduction to some of those initiatives. So Planetary Resources of Washington is going to launch its first prospecting telescopes. Deep Space Industries of Virginia is going to harvest metals, and Golden Spike of Colorado is going to offer trips, including for trips for miners. So the travel aspect of it. So in our own words, what was the purpose of mentioning the several companies?
I would say to express the excitement, the buzz around this new, field. Again, there's many different companies, all these different startups, money that's being pumped into it. I would say really just to express the interest, the excitement that may well be surrounding this new field.
And also to maybe introduce us to the specific things that are being planned. So introduce us to what's being planned, because it would be very easy to speak in generalities here without mentioning any specific projects that are in play here. So does any of this match choice A?
Doesn't seem to talk about the possibility of it or the feasibility.
So it's not only space mining. So whenever you get a question about what do all of these things do, beware of answers that talk about just one. So one of them mentioned space mining, right? Telescopes, metals, harvesting metals is space mining. And then the one on line 17 was trips to help space miners. So there was a little space mining here and there, but it wasn't the overall thrust. So that one's just one. What about, does it match choice B?
The evidence of growing interest in space mining. I would say that there is nothing counter to that one, I would say.
Yeah, and it's kind of making me want to take back what I said about A. So, okay, can you tell me what you think is wrong with A now that we know that it actually is more about space mining?
So what is wrong with A?
Well, okay. The technical advances that make space mining possible. So we're definitely, if we look at this area here, it's definitely not about noting the technological advances, right? It's talking about potential projects that plan to be done, but it's not saying like, oh, we just discovered to do this and now we're going to take advantage of that. So the technical advantages is maybe the big problem with A. And then we'll leave B alone for now. Do we see anything that we like or don't like about C?
Emphasize the large profits to be made from space mining. Again, trying to confine myself to this paragraph where obviously they have us pointed to 9 to 17. It doesn't explicitly talk about large profits to be made. Specifically, 9 to 17.
And we know that it's very easy to read that there's this company and there's that company and there's that company. So particularly someone beginning in SAT prep would maybe say, well, you know, they're companies, so there's profits, but there's that one level of removal. And that's what you want to look out for. If there is anything nice that the SAT is doing for us, is that it's making everything extremely literal. So if I have to say, well, because of this, there's that, and because of this, there's that. So here, because of these companies, there's their profits, then we've already have one level of removal, and there's probably a better answer choice. And do we like or dislike anything about D?
The diverse ways to carry out space mining operations.
So
really,
go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really think that it gets into enough detail about the diverse ways of doing so, in my opinion.
Different ways to carry it out. Yeah, it's not different ways to do space mining. If anything, it might be elements of the industry, right? Like it's not like deep space is doing it one way and planetary resources doing it another way. They're all doing different jobs that are all part of the overall space mining. So they're not like competing with one another in terms, you know, because they're offering different products from one another, right?
Correct.
So it's sort of talking about something slightly different in choice D. So, okay, back to B, which seems to be one we didn't have an issue with. Provide evidence of growing interest in space mining. Why is there growing interest? Because you have one person trying to start one company, or another group trying to do another company, and a third group trying to do a third company. So there are all these different groups trying to create companies relating to space mining. Then there's definitely, you know, demonstrating the interest in it. So
which
Patrick,
has been growing also the verb, or obviously it's been growing. There was not really much before, not mentioned. This has all just kind of been coming about in recent years, specifically.
Yeah, and what word do we see in there that
in 2013?
What word do we see in there that talks more specifically about the growing interest that we can point to and say that right there is the growing interest?
Let me take a look. If you find it first, you can say it. I'm scanning. I was going to say something else, but go ahead.
The forum is hot on the heels of the unveiling. So hot, this is hot. We're hot on the heels of something. We're unveiling something. So there's that idea of like, you know, new and exciting and what's happening. You know, this is really happening, right?
And again, because the passage was written, or this passage is from 2013 and the unveilings were in 2012. So keeping the context in mind, right? That was pretty, you know, fresh, new companies coming out at that time.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't notice that. That's the kind of thing I would never notice, by the way. Okay, so 43, the author of passage 1 indicates that space mining could have which positive effect? So this is where our speed reading comes in handy, our speed reading every time, because we may have read it superficially the first time, but now we're reading for a purpose, which is much more effective. When your mind is looking for something, it's going to work so much better than it worked when we were just generally going through it, almost kind of spinning our wheels. So what could be the positive effect? So I have notes on this, but I almost refuse to look at my notes because I want to emphasize that organic process that students have to go through. So what could be the positive effect? So we have the introduction, the sort of mentioning of all the things that are, all the projects that are going to take place. And we're looking for a phrase that says, there's going to be this positive effect. So within a few decades, firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals, such as platinum and gold. And we've talked a little bit about how, you know, you can't always look for it, but sometimes there's kind of this continuity. So the first kind of question might be talking about this, and the second question might be talking about this. So we ended up like right here after just one question. And then lo and behold, the next question is talking about this. So that tends to happen, just something to keep your eyes out for. So based on this quote that we pointed out here, how would you answer that in your own words? What could be the positive effect?
Well, to paraphrase, but basically just to restate, meet the earthly demands for, you know, all these different metals that are useful on Earth. So a positive effect to people on Earth by being able to mine in space. Again, just being able to produce these maybe on a larger scale or increase the supply, which would then make the price go down. Not to get into too many technicalities, but just that, yeah, just to paraphrase that one phrase.
Yeah, and meeting earthly demands. So when we say answer in our own words could be their words. Sometimes the things that are said are so technical that you don't want to lean toward their words because it's almost meaningless because it's so high level. But if it's something nice and simple like meeting earthly demands, that's answering the question. And so that's giving us that moment of processing before we look at the answer choices, one of our capital ideas that we emphasize. And which answer does that seem to match here for 43?
I think it would need to be A.
So it's going to yield materials that are important. So it's going to meet earthly demands, yield materials important to Earth's economy. So those line up so perfect. And that's what a right answer feels like. And if it doesn't, then you want to kind of keep honing your craft on this for students that are listening to this. So just looking at wrong answer choices is not going to raise the value of any precious metals. It's not going to create unanticipated innovations. And we're not talking about changing scientists' understanding, especially not based on lines, 18 to 23. Definitely not changing any understandings there.
It already seems like they have a pretty good kind of comprehension and a good grasp of what could come from space mining. It's not going to change, right? It's not going to change whatever their perception is already, or what they already know to be true. That already seems to be pretty.
Yeah, and it's just simply not what they're talking about, right? Exactly. Like their words were meet earthly demands. So, we might want to twist things into other things sometimes, but how nice and just straightforward and easy is it when you just see the thing right there and it just easily matches the answer choice. Remember, guys, you're not just here to get the answers right. You're here to preserve your time and your emotional energy. You might be sort of full of energy on section 1, but if you're giving yourself a major headache for every question that you answer, by the time section 4 comes around, you might be struggling a little bit. And, that's the calculator math section. It's got a lot of big numbers and, complicated things. So we're here to kind of teach you to just enjoy this process as much as possible, or not stress out and not leave yourself in a state where you just can't do this anymore. And be that one guy who gets up and walks out of an SAT. Yeah. You're saying?
Yeah. Just to point one more thing too. Again, had you not been able to find the part of the passage that bingo very, I think it was very easy once we found that part to see which answer needed to be correct, just in case you weren't able to find that part. That's why, again, for D or C, if you're not sure where the correct answer lies, you can look at D, C, and B and say, all right, if this were true, what would it look like, or where would it be? And if you can't find that, then you can work backwards. Here, obviously, we were able to find exactly the part that we needed. But if you were unable to, and you had to come back to this question, look at D. Is that stated anywhere? It's not, which means it can't be correct.
Yeah, and okay, so if it hadn't occurred so easily, then we would want to follow the process of restating what we just said on the previous question for evidence-based question. So we want to restate that what is the positive effect that it's going to yield materials important to Earth's economy, and then go through each of the lines saying, okay, is 18 to 22 saying it's yielding materials important to the economy? Is 24 to 28 saying it? 29 to 30 saying it? 41 to 44? And if we're still struggling at that point, this is timing and it's about doing things that are easier first. So once we're going to say, okay, we're going to put some heavier thought into that, that means we're going to skip 44 for now and do it later, because on the SAT and the ACT, you can't be really, really doing difficult work on a question until you've done everything that was easier work first. So you have to be very willing to go out of order. It's something we emphasize regularly. So let's go to number 45. We're talking about passage-based vocabulary. And when you have a question on passage-based vocabulary, there's two things that we say to do. You need the momentary main idea, and which is going to be, if we're talking about line 19, it'd be roughly like line 17 to 21 or something like that. And then you want to invent your own word based on that momentary main idea. But when you end up declaring the momentary main idea to yourself, you'll kind of unconsciously invent a new word on your own anyway. It's funny how that kind of just naturally happens. So we're talking about, at that moment, just like we were just talking about, we're talking about meeting earthly demands for precious metals. So that's what they were saying. They were just hypothesizing that, or drumming up excitement that with this new technology, we can maybe get everything we need. So look at how I just did it by accident, right? Meeting earthly demands, meeting earthly needs, right? And so when that momentary main idea is incredibly powerful here. I just made everything
That's
disappear.
the word that came to mind for me as well, which is pretty funny.
Really? Needs?
So yeah, that just something that people want. That's what
wants and needs. Yep. And we don't, in everyday life, that might be something that's kind of a little, there might be a difference between wants and needs, but here we don't care so much. So this is a moment brought to you by Microsoft OneNote, which tends to crash a lot. I don't know if you noticed, I switched to the kind of the older version of OneNote.
It looks like mine, so maybe I'm on the old one also.
Yeah, well, there's this one is the web-based one, and it has its advantages and disadvantages. And then we've got this other one, which is the sort of computer-based one. So the difference between them is that in this sort of more pale purple one, the information is actually being saved on my computer every time and then synced online. And the other one is just fully online only. So, okay, so 45. So we talked about our needs or desires or wants versus needs. So that's taking us right over to choice D. We're going to meet the things that we desire for precious metals, especially because we're talking about precious metals like gold. We're talking about, we don't need gold. We don't need platinum and gold and personal electronics like iPhones, right? So that's more of a desire rather than a need, like water or food or oxygen or something like that. So, alrighty. So we've just done number 45 and then 46. What function does the discussion of water in 35 to 40 serve? So we're going over there. All right. Getting a little crashing going on. 1 second here. If any viewers online are more familiar with Microsoft OneNote and can tell me why I tend to get this many crashes, that would be very handy. Okay, so 35 to 40, and we've got the discussion of water that's right there. So what are they saying? Water from the moon's poles could be sent to astronauts. Splitting water could become refueling stations. So based on water, we could have drinking and radiation shields. We could have spacecraft fuel. We could have refueling stations. So in our own words, what's this discussion of water doing?
I would say it's outlining different uses that we would have for water, mind, and space.
Yeah,
simply put.
And like we always say, the area in question is the what, and the area in before and after it is the why, right? So we've got the what right here, and it would never hurt us to kind of look just a little bit above. That will kind of give us insight as to why they're saying this. And they were saying that, kind of implying that things could be upside down, right? Just remembering this passage, it was saying, actually, I might be remembering passage 1. Actually, no, it's right here. What's worth more, a kilogram of gold or a kilogram of water when you're in space? So it's kind of saying that the environment of space could turn things upside down. Things that are valuable on Earth could not be so valuable, and things that, it could just have a different value system than what we are typically having on Earth. And then they're giving examples of that. So water, which to us just sounds like, an everyday thing that everyone has access to in the developed world, right? But here it could be of critical importance, and it's giving us examples of the sort of critical importance of water. So what answer does that take us to?
C. Which I think is pretty clear to see from how we went over it. The other answers are pretty clearly wrong, I would say.
Examples supporting the claim that was made in the previous paragraph. The claim was that water is going to be more important, and these are examples of that. Great. Okay, so 47, the central claim of passage 2. is that space mining has a positive potential, but, so let's kind of just.
Again, here, just to mention also, if you were going through the test, central claim, a question like this might be one that you would choose to skip, as we say. But obviously for the purpose of this video, we're just going in order from 1 to 52. Just
Yeah,
one thing to keep in mind.
Every time you're answering a question, you get deeper and deeper into it. So when you encounter a question like this, you may or may not be ready for it. And you just want to have that high willingness to kind of jump past questions that you're not quite ready for yet. But going through the passage, they kind of said, there's all this excitement. No doubt it's going to make people wealthier. But before we fire up our rockets, let's pause for thought. The consequences merit careful consideration. So what's the central claim? That we should be careful and we should really analyze this before we jump into it. So which answer is that?
I would say B.
The effects should be thoughtfully considered before it becomes a reality. Yep, very good. Okay, so now we're going on to 48. Like we said, we want the momentary main idea for passage-based vocab, and then we want to invent our own word. So let's go to line 68. History suggests that those will be hard lines to hold. So it's kind of a little random there because we don't really know the context in which they're saying it. So I'm going to start a little bit earlier. So part of this is about principles. Some will argue that this is not ours to despoil. Others will suggest that glutting ourselves on space riches is not an acceptable alternative. So they're talking about kind of like inherent conflict in ideas or disagreement between different perspectives on what we can do. And history suggests that those will be hard lines to hold. So if I'm translating into my own words here, it's saying that we already have a conflict going on in how people feel about this. So it's going to be difficult to kind of continue in that state of conflict. So I just by doing that, I unconsciously came up with my own word. This is going to be difficult to continue in that sort of state. So these are hard lines to continue. These are hard lines to maintain, right?
Uphold, yes.
To uphold, nice. Yep, so the important part of that is going through that process of kind of determining it on your own first. So we just did 48. Relationship between the two passages. We talked about this while we were speed reading it. Passage 1 was talking about this exciting new frontier. And passage 2 was expressing the idea that we should just be careful. It wasn't necessarily saying we shouldn't consider it, but that we should be careful. And we read that a moment ago, mainly.
Hold your space horses, I would say.
Is that one of the lines?
No, I just made it up. Hold your horses, hold your space horses before you.
They didn't have access to you when you wrote this article. It would have been so much more
hip.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, we should pause for thought. We should these things merit careful consideration, was kind of what they were saying in their own words. So that's the idea of being careful. So where does that take us as far as answer choices?
Let me take a quick scan.
Is it refuting the claim, illustrating the phenomenon, arguing against the practicality? It kind of seems like it is. Like I would put that one away for later if we're just getting into this.
Okay.
But then expressing reservations is absolutely perfect.
The word reservations, yes, I think that.
And something that I was mentioning earlier is the idea that, we have different types of pairs of passages to know about. When you're reading a double passage, it's not always pro and con, which is really common. One passage is in support of something, one is just against it. You could also have theory versus practice. So here's an idea that we're talking about, and then in the next passage it's saying, okay, I tried that idea. This particular one is kind of a new idea versus kind of expressing reservations of an idea. We could have different perspectives. I'm thinking of one passage that's saying a story from the perspective of the main character. and then the next passage tells the same story from the perspective of someone else who's seeing the main character? Any other you can think of off the top of your head?
I was actually thinking of that one also, maybe interpretations that may vary. So maybe we're talking about the same event or the same story, let's just say, but the interpretations will be different, perhaps.
Different interpretations of the same thing, seeing it like from different ideological angles. So there are lots of ways passages can pair up, and the sort of fast reading and the jumping right through is going to help you see that better. Just the ultimate irony, you know, we're not trying to try harder. We're trying to kind of let go a little more when we do these things, so that you can kind of let things kind of easily come to you. So number 50 now, the author of passage 2 will most likely respond to the discussion of the future of space mining by claiming that, okay, so this is the question that we say has a lot of moving parts, because we've got to deeply understand what's going on in 18 to 28 in order to kind of know what the author of passage 2 would say about that. So on 18 to 28, they're talking about the potential of meeting earthly demands for precious metals. So we may go to space and find gold and platinum and so on.
And then also to build an off-world, where does it say? The off-world the economy. So they're also not just to meet whatever demands might be on Earth, but then to create almost a whole other world where they can use all of these resources for interplanetary functions.
Yep. So
Earth's realm.
So it's the idea of having a whole new economy going on from all these discoveries that are going to be going on. So there's this new economy, and then what does passage 2 say about that? Let's see here. So right around this area of the passage, it's talking about the off-world economy, right? So perfect, according to what you were saying. So 18 and 28 says we're creating this whole new economy. And what does passage 2 say about that? There's a relevant legal and regulatory framework that is not adequate. And yes.
Follow the blue line.
Just a great. So
which is going to just say basically that the regulatory framework is fragmentary at best, and there's questions that need to be broached about the stewardship of this off-planet economy. Now we're there.
So it says, without consensus, claims will be disputed, investments risky, gains made insecure, and we need broad agreement, right? Anything else?
I think that's pretty
regulatory
good.
Framework.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the answer choices, I think it's pretty clear. Quickly,
which answer would that be?
I would say B. Difficult to bring about in the absence of regulations.
So we need regulations, and they mentioned regulations in 78, broad agreement in 84, consensus in 85. So it's all pointing toward regulation, people coming together and sort of agreeing on how it should go. And then so the evidence from that could be any of those. So let's see, could it be 74 to 76? 74 to 76 is kind of the beginning of that, but it's not specifically mentioning regulations, right?
Correct.
Alrighty, and 81 to 83. One speaker said that regulation should be avoided. So 81 to 83 is actually the opposite, right? Mm-hmm. And 85 to 87, without consensus, and consensus is kind of a code word for laws. It's the laws that everyone agrees on, because consensus is the idea of full agreement. And then just going to 60 to 63, just totally irrelevant to what we've been talking about, because we've already been sort of zeroing in on where we saw this information, which was much deeper into the passage. So 51 is going to be D. And last but not least, what point about the resources that will be highly valued in space is implicit in passage 1 and explicit in passage 2? We're realists here, guys. And we feel that there will be some really tough crazy questions that you're going to encounter. So ideally, for a high-level student with Ivy League aspirations, you want to be getting all the questions right that you deserve to get right, that are nice and easy. But if the College Board is just going to go crazy to make things difficult for you, then yeah, you can miss that question and still hit your 1550. I mean, does that sound so terrible for some of you guys, or will you only be happy with 1600? Let us know in the comments. So in 52, there, I just know this question well, so maybe we'll go through it just a little quickly. It kind of says, let's see, in line 74, the resources that are valuable in orbit and beyond may be very different to those we prize on Earth. So the idea that the resources are going to be different, like we're going to prize in Earth, we care about gold and platinum because water is in abundance, but on space, it might be the exact opposite. There actually is a diamond island. Have you heard a diamond planet? Have you heard of that? An entire planet somewhere in the universe that's fully made of diamonds. So how about that?
We should try to purchase it.
Yeah, right. Forget about SAT prep. Just purchase that planet. So over here in line 29, it says water mined from other worlds could become the most desired commodity. What's worth more, gold or water? So they never specifically say that gold is worth, water is worth more than gold in space. They say what's worth more. So right here, they're mentioning it in this kind of implied kind of way, like less direct, definitely. And then as we get back into this other line, they're saying, you know, the things that are valuable in space are different. So now they're specifically saying it. So it's the idea that the resources that we care about may be different in space than on Earth, which is exactly choice A. Any comments there?
If you're ever stuck again, I know that we might make it look a bit easy with where to find the part of the passage, right? As we just did, we were able to point it out pretty quickly. But again, look for the keywords, the resources. Speed read each passage, look where it talks about resources, not the resources on Earth, but in space, and just try to find those areas and see if anything makes sense to that question. That's kind of the process you'll go through. Obviously, we've worked with these passages many times before, so we can pinpoint it a bit quicker. But even if it was the first time we were doing it, I think that's what I would say, pick up on the keywords from the question where you think it came up, and just you can own in on those parts of the passage and then speed read and go from there.
And just one last quick comment, guys. If you're sitting around 1100, 1200, 1300 on the SAT in your practice that you're doing right now, get yourself to 1400, 1450, get yourself just a little higher. I find a lot of students might beat themselves up over why they can't get the hardest question, but meanwhile, they don't know the formula for vertex of a parabola or just some of the more basic things. So make sure you're an expert on the basics. And if you are, start studying how to get some of those tough ones. But like we said a second ago, what's wrong with the 1550? If my children got that score on the SAT, I'd be extremely proud of them.